I have a topic here which I used to actually conduct training classes for AI as a part of Intel's AI Academy, the company I worked with prior to founding Certient. And this used to be a course-long kind of workshop we used to do on AI 101. And then we had condensed a seminar out of it that we used to do in like 4 hours. And I'm going to attempt in the next 25 minutes to help create a baseline of AI knowledge. And the intention is to make anybody who's not even familiar with the basics of AI to understand the concepts and also to be able to build on some of the challenges that are coming up, that are being discussed, to understand the conceptual thought and the ideas behind it. So this talk that I have has a lot of oversimplifications, but the idea is to provide you conceptual knowledge. So we'll go to the very first slide. We want to recognize one of our standards leader, also a member of INSIT's AI from NIST, Elham, who got recognized in the Time magazine. And AI has become a subject even in the Time magazine with AI standards. She's not here, but wanted to recognize her. We'll go to the next slide, please. Okay. The first thing, being a standards geek, I wanted to use the standards definition of generative AI, and it is an AI system which produces synthetic data. You see 2 pictures here, and that's my favorite band, and they did visit DC in 1964 and 1966, and some of you may have seen them too. Now the question is, out of these 2 pictures, one of them is real, one of them is synthetically generated. So the picture to the right, how many of you feel that is a synthetic picture? How many of you feel the picture to the left is a synthetic picture? Many of you. And you're right, the picture to the left is a synthetic picture. But as you can see, the 2 pictures, they both look very real. And you can see the shadows, you can see the background. It's very hard to distinguish what is real and what is unreal here. And that is the power of generative AI. To peel this onion, we're going to have to look, starting with AI, we'll look to understand a little bit of machine learning. Then we'll peel the onion to the latest technology that's dominated the thinking for the last 8 or 9 years, which is deep learning. And then we'll talk about generative AI, and I'll also talk about LLMs and the problems that they present. And I'll do this in 25 minutes. So we'll go to the next slide, please. AI defined, it's a very large definition. The standards body deliberated on the definition of AI for 2.5 years. That's a definition we came up with. I won't read it, but the colloquial sense of AI is the second definition from Wikipedia, which is technology that allows machines to do what we typically expect from humans, being able to predict something, being able to make a decision, being able to converse, being able to recognize an object. That is colloquially the definition of AI, and it's a really good definition. On the left, I have a picture. Again, a lot of it is not very clear, but the body of AI is very large, and currently the dominant topic lands up being on the very upper right corner, which is neural networks and LLMs and several of the technologies like deep learning, which is a part of that. But there are other aspects to AI, and as we look at the next maybe 4 or 5 years to make AI safe, some of the older paradigms of expert systems where you actually had a body of knowledge and you had decision trees that helped give you very deterministic answers, them coupled with generative AI will become fairly important. And that's the reason why it's important to look at the entire set of features that comprise AI. One of the challenges we see, a lot of people, they have a very narrow definition of AI, which really is limited to what we're seeing, which is not explainable. And so you see policymakers sometimes make policies that are too broad. As an example, the SEC came up with something that's for broker-dealer, and it actually is a broad sweeping understanding of AI and prohibits several uses of AI where actually somebody could also be doing simple things like linear regression, which have been used using Excel. So it's important to understand also to build the concepts of AI, to understand the deterministic portion and build from the machine learning area. So we'll go to the next slide. And on the left is basically linear regression. All of us use this in Excel. You know, you have house prices, you have the size of a house, and they're correlated. And you draw a line, and then you can estimate what could be the price of my house given an area, something that all of us use all the time. Couple of things to look at here. At the end of the day, it is a line, it has two parameters, and it's being optimized. So we're actually doing some form of fitting where the error from all the points to the line is being actually minimized, and that's a concept that I'll request you to keep with yourself. On the right is, again, a machine learning concept which comes out of clustering, which is being able to take two parameters and say whether it's rain or it's snow, you know, and it's, again, very simplistic. But this is used very often, even now. It's k-means clustering, where given two features, and you actually have them on a graph, and the ones which cluster and belong to a certain category, you can supervise and label that as belonging to that category. So with these two foundational concepts, let's take one step forward. And this is not one step, it's actually a giant leap forward with the next slide. And this is essentially, on the left is brain activity. So neural networks or deep learning, what it's based on, is kind of, does have a basis in thinking about how humans actually think, how we make decisions. You see these neurons in our brain, which are decision-making, minor decision-making elements that exist in our brain connected, and they are firing, so to say. A similar concept is applied in the digital world. And what is a neuron? It's basically a number between 0 and 1. It takes in a large number of weights. It adds to it a bias. The weights and the bias are the parameters, and you get a number between 0 and 1 by multiplying that. And there's an activation function, very often a sigmoid, which makes this between 0 and 1. Now, mathematically, you can just think about it as it's a vector math that creates a number between 0 and 1. I mentioned to you in the linear regression that we have parameters. We'll go one step forward and look at how a neural network actually works in a very short slide with a bird's eye view again. We'll go to the next slide, please. So when we talk about these models like ChatGPT and any of the LLMs that are existing today, they're in a sense billions of these neurons interconnected, created artificially, and they are trained on a very large amount of data. So you can have all the images train this data, and when it's trained, it actually has a feedback loop that adjusts these parameters, and that's called backpropagation. Essentially, similar to the way we looked at the linear regression with a line, you are minimizing a function, which is the error between what was found and what it was laying out. So if you have a picture of a bridge, if you look at it intuitively, what a neural network tends to do after its training, it actually reduces this to a set of features. It happens magically, almost similar to the way it happens in our brains. And it, based on the firings of the neurons, it actually classifies these, these data points into objects. This is, again, an oversimplification, but conceptually, looking at large amount of data, analyzing features, getting trained, adjusting its parameters, and coming up with the right answers. And if you put a very large amount of data, we're surprised by how accurate it gets. Potentially be an image. And then there is a discriminator, a neural network that's trained to recognize a face. So the decimator says this is a face or this is not a face. And it adjusts the weights of the generator. So what starts off in the image on the right, you can see initially when such a network is trained, it basically has what is noise. But magically, by constantly reinforcing what is correct, by adjusting the weights and the parameters, it generates images of faces. And these faces are not exactly a one-to-one correspondence between the faces that the network has been trained on. And that resulting image is actually synthetic. But if you go to see the inspiration of it, it is by all the faces that it has learned. And then if you see within the concept of an artist who generates a painting of an unknown person, in a way, they're also in their memory, in their mind, looking at faces they have seen, and based on their history, their memory, they actually create art. But you could do that artificially, and that's where the challenge happens. Is this is years it takes for somebody to be an artist. With generative AI, you do become an artist very quickly. We'll go to the next slide, please. We're taking another step forward from the world of creating images and the networks we looked at. This is a popular quiz show on TV. When I hear the rain on my roof, I dash in my kitchen. And language models essentially are statistical models that fill in words that are plausible, that can be relevant to the sentence. So cook soup, seems like the probability of that was 9.4% based on all the data that the model was trained on. So somebody in some novel, in some description somewhere, heard rain on the roof and cooked soup, and the network picked it up, and 9.4% is what it heard. Warm up a kettle, some people perhaps even nap, and it looks like some people relax. And then I don't think people jog, but that's highly unlikely somebody would jog in their kitchen when they hear rain on the roof. So conceptually, it looks and understands statistically and fills in the word. Now, words, as you can think, are abstract. In our world of humans, we look at words and vocabulary that we acquire. In the case of a machine, they're actually numerical in nature. So these words are converted into tokens, and tokens are numbers. And essentially, what the machine is doing is a lot of stochastic calculations, which actually talk about what is the correct word, but it doesn't recognize that as a word. For a machine, it's purely a number. So if you think about it, do machines understand speech? Well, actually, they just recognize what was converted as a number, and it kind of was very commonly seen. So it's a probabilistic math. It's questionable. And again, do they understand language? It's more about what they're seeing in terms of statistics. And that's why some of the arguments against machine learning were using this technology. Some of the words that I used is large language models as stochastic patterns. So they're taking in data which they don't understand, and they're giving you results. But there is a lot of math involved in it, and that is the challenge that, yes, it's based on math, and it's not necessarily based on an understanding of language as such as we understand it. We'll go to the next slide, please. Now, we're taking a leap now to 2017, which is where a paper that was published that actually became a turning point in the history of overall deep learning and large language models. It was a paper that had a very catchy title, and the paper was a scientific paper with colleagues from Stanford in Google, with the lead author being a gentleman by the name of Vaswani, who wrote it, and it's called Attention is All You Need. What this paper talked about really is taking in a large amount of data, and it basically has a language model which has a decoder and an encoder to very simplistically understand the concept of attention. It is identifying words in a sentence which are the more important words, which need the attention. That's a very oversimplistic sense of understanding what happens in the background. So a very large amount of text, for example, this has actually been generated by ChatGPT by itself for this presentation. It figures out that there is a main subject, which is this planet called Kepler 452b. Based on figuring out what it should put its attention on and how it has seen sentences being summarized, it is able to reduce what is text, which could be very long. It could be almost a novel, also can be reduced in a few lines by this understanding of attention, which is not very different from the way humans, we understand words and we understand sentences. We focus on the important portion to figure out what is being said. We'll go to the next slide, please. And here I come to what perhaps may be of interest to many of you, and the challenges that come with generative AI and with the technology I described. The first one being hallucinations. At the end of the day, you have trained a model on very large amounts of data, and it is actually using a lot of statistical calculations and producing results. All of them are very realistic, but again, it's not always right. Second thing comes from copyright. And as an example, all the pictures that got trained on, I mean, sure, they were the inspiration. And then the argument against it is, when you look at, like, one could take, for example, Charles Dickens' novel, Great Expectation, on unrequited love, a theme which has repeated itself through the ages, and movies have been made through the years on that concept. So in a way, artists do copy and writers do copy concepts as such. But the interesting thing about AI is you could do this in a flash. You could create a story based on Great Expectation, unrequited love, set in New Orleans in the year 1998. And you can have the descriptions of the cafes, you can have everything done in a flash, just the way you had those images created so quickly. And that's the question where you have copyright. When you're trained on data from the past, and again, the attention looks at training data to figure out the he's and the she's. So a lot of the training data may well have doctors being described as he's, and generative AI would make those assumptions. And again, that's the place where you have filters and technology which goes and corrects this bias. Adversarial attacks, and this is important because within generative AI, you also have times where, for example, it's trained itself on data. Now, you can even make it train on data that you authenticate. For example, you could train it on data from Wikipedia. On the other hand, any data that's in public domain could be attacked. So you could have a Wikipedia entry changed in a day just when training is going on, and it could actually change what the model says. So you could have adversarial attacks, misinformation, deepfakes. Then again, you have data privacy, which all of you understand, because at the end of the day, in prompts, we're putting in questions, we're putting in sometimes text that we want to be summarized that perhaps could be private to ourselves. Accountability, when you have a wrong result, who's responsible for it? The environmental impact, some of these large models take months of training. It's a lot of power, resources, sustainability issues. Workforce displacement, again, a lot of jobs where, those could be kind of automated. And a real challenge also for regulations and governance because of all these issues which kind of create different parts of the world having different opinions based on cultural norms. So it certainly is a lot of challenge. Again, a lot of promise too. But let's ask ChatGPT in the last slide the question that was the question of our conference and seminar today. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I asked ChatGPT on 10.6, will generative AI rewrite the future? It has a reasonably good answer. So generative AI has the potential to influence the future significantly, but its impact will depend on technological advancements, regulatory decisions, ethical considerations, and societal choices. While it won't single-handedly rewrite the future, it will play a substantial role in shaping it. And the last portion actually perhaps could be rewritten. I didn't rewrite it because I wanted to let it write. It should be shaping it if mankind uses innovation, does economic changes, and addresses important ethical and social implications. We can't expect generative AI to solve that for us. But that is the answer, and certainly a very interesting time in the present here. And as they said, may you live in interesting times. I'm glad we all are. Thank you. So for our discussion this morning, we'll have our speakers come one after the other, and we'll have a Q&A after every speaker. So I'm happy to take any question that any of you may have on any of what I presented, and we'll do the same with all our speakers. I don't see any hands. Go ahead, please.
Is this thing on? Oh, hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. My name is Ben Miles with the International Trade Administration. I guess I had a question. So I suppose these methods of generative AI and large language models are relatively matured, but I'm wondering if there have been alternatives proposed or other types of systems that are substantially different but achieve similar results that have appeared.
Sure, and that's a really good question. So if you think about it, we've been using chatbots and we've been talking with machines for the last 20 years, right? A lot of that technology uses traditional machine learning. So there is technology that understands language. It's based on actually making rules. So it's actually analyzing sentences, looking at what are objects, what are predicates, just the way a lot of grammar in the English language works. A lot of decision trees. And the challenge, of course, is that it doesn't do the kind of work that generative AI does. And your question actually has also perhaps an answer here to one of the challenges I mentioned, which is like the issues around hallucinations, for example. Now, if you ask generative AI, and this is something I actually did try, that it came up with something which I knew was not correct, and I prompted it to give me a reference for it. Believe it or not, it came up with a fake reference. So it came up page 37, third line, and it can do kind of, you can call it reference engineering, but that's the place where you would need these traditional models of having rules and having decision-based data, and then you could check. So the way the future may well evolve is that it could be a combination of generative AI and some of the traditional machine learning methods to make things safer. And again, in the filters that are used, even now, it's traditional methods that are used. If there are no other questions, I'll introduce our next speaker. We're very privileged to have today Steve Velby as our next speaker. And many of you may know Steve from his prior role as the Executive Director and COO of IEEE. And I was just talking to Steve prior to this presentation, and we're lucky that Steve got tapped for the role just after he retired from IEEE as the Deputy Director for National Security at the White House Office of Science and Technology. Steve and his team are focused on strengthening our nation's global competitiveness, reducing risk through assessment, development, deployment, and governance of current and emerging technology. We're very privileged and lucky to have him speak to us today.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much. Didn't want to do that. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all today about an important topic, the emerging challenges, opportunities, and evolution of advanced AI systems. My name is Steve Welby, and as Rohit mentioned, it's my privilege to serve as a Deputy Director of National Security at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. The Office of Science and Technology Policy's mission is to maximize the benefits of science and technology to advance the health, prosperity, security, environmental quality, and justice for all Americans. And we carry out that mission by advising the President and White House senior staff on key issues related to science and technology, and by coordinating federal government technology policies and priorities. Today, our nation has immense aspirations to achieve robust health and ample opportunity for every person in every community, to overcome the climate crisis by reimagining our infrastructure, restoring our relationship with nature, and securing environmental justice. We work to sustain global security and stability. We seek to build a competitive economy that creates good-paying jobs. And we all want to foster a strong, resilient, and thriving democracy. I believe that artificial intelligence is already helping to shape our future, and that this technology holds the potential to help us achieve many of these broad and deep national ambitions. But for us to deploy AI thoughtfully and in a manner aligned with our values, we're going to need to work to manage both opportunity and risk. President Biden has made clear that AI is one of the most powerful technologies of our time, and that American leadership in the world today is going to require American leadership in artificial intelligence. And that's why artificial intelligence is one of the top priorities of the White House. AI systems now touch on numerous aspects of our lives. They have brought benefits across a wide range of domains, from cancer diagnosis to agricultural efficiency, to helping small business owners cut costs. Advances in artificial intelligence can supercharge that progress, making life better for everyone and helping to meet our greatest challenges. But at the same time, the President has said to seize the benefits of artificial intelligence, we also need to first manage its risks. Because the potential for AI is so broad, the risks that we face relative to artificial intelligence are also broad. There are risks to information integrity and fraud, risks to safety and security, risks to privacy, civil rights, civil liberties, and other human rights, and risks to jobs in the economy. The administration has been working to ensure that AI is developed safely and responsibly, with a goal to both advance innovation in artificial intelligence and to protect Americans' rights and safety. To support deploying AI in a manner that reflects our values, we have begun by first laying out those values and beginning a conversation about how they should be embedded into the systems that are starting to influence our daily lives. Just over a year ago, after hearing from hundreds of folks across the United States and beyond, and coordinating with policy experts across the federal government, the Office of Science and Technology Policy released the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. And it's up on the White House website. I encourage you to take a look at it. And it was intended as a guide for how to leverage AI technology in ways that both reinforce our highest values and help protect society from potential risk. It seems that almost every day we read another story or read another study or hear from another person who's been negatively impacted by AI systems or by decisions that were made based on the outputs from some AI-enabled automated process. From violating individual rights to limiting access to life-changing opportunities, or even in some cases where individual safety has been endangered, these systems can have dramatic impacts, often without the impacted individual's knowledge or consent. These kind of harms run counter to our core democratic values, values that respect fundamental right to privacy, freedom from discrimination, and our basic individual dignity. We want to leverage the opportunity that's afforded by powerful AI technology in a manner that protects people's rights and makes sure that automated systems work for everyone. The document I mentioned, the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, lays out 5 core protections that we believe everyone should be entitled to when it comes to AI or automated systems. First, AI systems should be safe and effective. You should be protected from unsafe or ineffective automated systems. Second, we should have protection from algorithmic discrimination. You should not face discrimination from algorithms, and systems should be used and designed in an equitable way. Third, data privacy. You should be protected from abusive data practices via built-in protections, and you should have agency over how your own data, the data about you, is being used. Fourth, notice and explanation. You should know that an automated system is being used and understand how and why it contributes to outcomes that impact you. And then fifth, alternatives, consideration, and fallback. You should have the ability to opt out where appropriate and have access to a person who can quickly consider and remedy problems that you encounter with artificial intelligence or automated systems. Taken together, those 5 principles outline what we believe one should expect from systems that are increasingly having significant impact on individual lives. So I wanted to next tell you a little bit about the steps that the Biden-Harris administration has taken to promote the innovative and responsible use of artificial intelligence. To help us gain the benefits of AI, the Office of Science and Technology Policy's National AI Initiatives Office has worked with research and development agencies across the federal government to lay out a new national strategic plan for artificial intelligence research and development that now includes a new priority for international cooperation. The administration has also recommended establishing a national AI research resource called the NARE, with computational and data resources available to broaden participation in artificial intelligence research and development to allow more to participate in this work than just a few large companies. And in December 2021, President Biden signed Executive Order 14058, which directed federal agencies to use technology to modernize government and implement services that are simple to use, accessible, equitable, protective, transparent, and responsible for everyone in America. To deliver broad information services to all Americans, we believe that artificial intelligence will be essential to address the challenges of delivering that capability at scale. To ensure that the federal government is leading by example, earlier this year, President Biden signed Executive Order 14091, which further strengthened the administration's focus on advancing racial equity and supporting underserved communities. Among other things, this order requires that when designing, developing, acquiring, and using artificial intelligence and automated systems, that federal agencies are required to do so in a way that advances equity. And we're not done. We are currently developing an executive order. The president last week suggested we'd have that executive order completed this fall, which increases the pace of work. We're also supporting responsible bipartisan legislation to help America lead the way in innovation in artificial intelligence. The Office of Management and Budget is drafting guidance for public comment that's also aimed at helping to empower agencies to put artificial intelligence to work responsibly. We hope that this guidance will also serve as a model for state and local governments and businesses, and to help follow in their own procurement practices around artificial intelligence. The White House is also working with agencies to recruit and upskill artificial intelligence talent and to help develop AI solutions to advance their missions. The White House has also been working with developers and deployers of artificial intelligence systems to help incorporate the protections that we believe are vital for responsible innovation in AI. This starts with extensive coordination across the federal government, as well as an ongoing set of engagements with industry, civil society, labor, international partners, and academia that have been held by the President, Vice President, senior White House leaders, cabinet members, heads of agencies, and many others in the administration. These efforts have already led to important actions. First, the administration has been engaging with industry leaders to advance the development of safe, secure, and trustworthy AI. There are many actions that AI developers can take today to make their products and services more responsible. That's why President Biden has secured voluntary commitments from 15 leading artificial intelligence companies. The companies agreed to follow a series of practices that can help limit risks to safety, security, and trust, and that we hope can serve as a bridge to regulation of this fast-moving technology. These include commitments to internal and external security testing of AI systems before release. It includes efforts to share information across industry and with government, to civil society and academia on managing AI risks. And it includes facilitating third-party discovery and reporting of vulnerabilities in artificial intelligence systems. Second, the administration has been actively engaged with civil society and academia. In June, the president met with experts and researchers at the intersection of technology and society. And in July, Vice President Harris convened consumer protection, labor, and civil rights leaders to discuss risks related to AI and to reaffirm the administration's commitment to protecting the American public from harm and discrimination. And third, because the impacts of AI go well beyond our shores, the administration's work on AI does as well. It's vital that the United States continue to lead the way to global, societal, economical, and technological progress, as is done in previous eras of change. But it's not simply about advancing the technological achievements in artificial intelligence, but we also need to advance the governance approaches and international norms needed to responsibly deploy AI to protect rights and safety. And we want to build and share those safeguards across the world. We're working with like-minded nations to help manage AI's risks, unlock AI's potential for good in both developed and developing countries, and to ensure strategic stability. One of the tools that we use to manage risk and to establish technological expectations and to ensure safety is through the thoughtful implementation of consensually developed technological standards. The work that's done by ANSI in coordinating US private sector standards activities, the efforts of the National Institute of Standards and Technology in coordinating federal government engagement in standards activity, and the work that's being done every day by professional, technical, and industry associations, consortia, and other private sector groups in developing technical standards is an often underappreciated foundation that underpins the confidence we have in safety, reliability, and suitability of all of our advanced technology. And I believe that there will be a strong role for technical standards in shaping the appropriate deployment of artificial intelligence technology. In May, the Biden-Harris administration released the United States government's National Standard Strategy for Critical and Emerging Technologies to strengthen both the United States' commitment to safeguard American consumers and to strengthen US leadership and competitiveness in international standards development. The strategy reinforces the United States' rule-based approach to standards development. It also emphasizes the federal government's support for international standards for critical and emerging technologies, such as AI, which will help accelerate standards efforts that are led by the private sector. We hope that these standards efforts will help facilitate global markets, contribute to interoperability, and promote US competitiveness and innovation. Our national standards strategy also recognizes that the technological contributions that flow from research and development are the driving force behind generating new standards. And we seek to bolster investment in pre-standardization research to promote innovation, cutting-edge science, and translational research that drives US leadership in international standards development. The administration is also calling on the private sector, universities, and research institutions to make long-term investments in standards development in critical and emerging technology areas, such as generative AI. So let me just come back to the title of this morning's meeting, Will Generative AI Rewrite the Future? I did not ask ChatGPT for a response, but my own response, I don't believe that AI will rewrite the future, because the future is ours to shape. We're going to decide the path that technology will take us, and I think it's very important that we have the conversation today that will shape that future. The conversation that's going on today in these areas about responsible development of these technologies, about safety, about appropriate standards, norms, and regulation, is what I think exactly the type of conversation we should be having. A conversation about how to best engage early to shape the application of emerging technology in a manner that maximizes the potential to improve people's lives, and at the same time strengthens our capacity to contain any associated risk. Artificial intelligence is beginning to influence many aspects of our lives. These systems, again, have the potential to bring many benefits, but as the President said, to get those benefits, we also have to first manage the risks. The Biden-Harris administration is committed to ensuring that AI is developed safely and responsibly, and is committed to protect Americans from harm and discrimination. Thanks for the invitation to speak to you today. Thanks for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah.
There are mics on every table. Feel free to ask.
Yeah.
Is this on? Thank you so much for your remarks and for the information and for informing us of all of the various aspects of what the administration is doing in this important area. Of the 5 principles that you mentioned at the beginning, one strikes me as possibly very difficult in the long run, which is the communication at the local level with individuals, local, state possibility, but where people in the United States are impacted by misuse of generative AI can be on a personal level as well as an industry level. So I'd love to hear some thoughts on what the administration can do to help support the dissemination of information so that at the local level, people have an idea of not only what's going on technology-wise, but also how they are being safeguarded.
Right, so the 5 principles in the AI Bill of Rights were, again, broad principles. They were intended to shape a conversation about the direction of going. They're not prescriptive in terms of telling you how to, and so let me just start there. But I think there's quite a bit that can be done in terms of taking inventory of where automated systems exist in decision processes and flows, and about making those inventories available to the public to let people know where algorithms are being used, to identify what decisions those algorithms contribute to. These seem like very simple sorts of things, but it actually provides enormous value to individuals to at least understand how their data is being used, to understand where decisions are being made without human intervention, and it provides them some context to be able to question when those decisions don't seem rational, when those decisions seem to run counter to their intuition. It begins a conversation about how those systems are working, about how the data is being used, about how processes are being implemented. particularly as we look at more advanced systems. Rohit did a fantastic job of covering an entire field in 20 minutes. But one of the key points that he made was that much of these systems, from the simplest kind of k-means system to much less transparent multidimensional neural network, these are probabilistic engines. The outputs that one receives from a large language model, if you enter the same prompt over and over again, may be different. What's actually happening under the hood are correlations associated with the input space and the training data to help generate responses. And so we have to use some caution as we think about using probabilistic systems in environments that can have real impact on individuals. Whether it's, as was discussed earlier, guardrails, using more determinative algorithms around these systems to act as governors, or whether it involves disclosure to allow people to understand and question when the results don't seem appropriate, or whether it involves the availability of human intervention to be able to correct for errors made by machine. These seem to be reasonable requests as we start to deploy this technology at scale.
One of the logical applications for AI is obviously in military and the feasibility of lethal autonomous weapon systems. It's my understanding that the current position of the administration, prior administrations, is that there'll always be a person in the loop. But as with nuclear weapons, we're not the only state that has access to this technology. And the potential for AI in the future can get to be, downright frightening. We could be in a position in the future where we might want to maintain that position of a human in the loop, but where our adversaries are not, and may find ourselves in a position where, in order to be competitive, we'd have no opportunity but to sacrifice that principle, which leads to the question of whether we need an international treaty to regulate the use of AI militarily in the future. Does the administration at the moment have any thought on whether that's feasible, and if feasible, whether it should be advanced at this time?
I'll object to the premise of the question, which suggests that the United States might abandon compliance with the international laws and norms of military norms in contingency. I think we've demonstrated over time that the U.S. has its strong commitment to international law and laws around use of military force. And is strongly committed to having a command and control environment that manages any artificial learning systems that might be engaged in military applications. So I don't, the question as posed, I think, is problematic. But I do know that the State Department is actively engaged with countries around the world in conversations about norm setting for artificial intelligence and military applications. And I think it's an important conversation to have. But I note that, like the context of military application, I'll look at other contexts as well, where we might apply artificial intelligence in decision-making in the civilian sector. Today, there are large bodies of rules, law, regulation, norms that apply to decision-making in any variety of realms. In the civilian sector, rules around decision-making, they're intended to avoid discrimination or bias. In military environments, to ensure compliance with international law. Often, these regulations need to apply whether a decision is made by human, by machine, or whatever. And so I think often we look to the novelty of AI and suggest that new and alternative regulation might be required. I think that one should look to the underlying obligations that we've committed to already, the values that we expressed earlier, treaties and law. And I suggest that in many cases, the appropriate application of those to decision-making, to systems, automated or non-automated, actually covers much of the concerns that people raise.
We can take one more question.
Hey. Is it on?
I can hear you.
Okay. Stephen Walls, Boeing Company. We heard some of the challenges from Rohit with the technology in general, but what are some challenges we face setting policy and strategy for the country?
I think that one conversation that's being had is about using care. I think that this is a fast-moving area. It's an area where we're still learning. We're still learning about the technology advancing at a remarkable pace. Billions of dollars are being invested in the private sector in these areas. And I think there's a great desire not to leap to instantly regulate, but to understand and build structures that can evolve as these technologies evolve and as we learn. And often, I think folks criticize federal regulation, legislation as being inflexible, slow to react to technology. I think this is a really interesting area. It's one where you have seen on the Hill now quite a number of meetings where legislators have attempted to learn and understand these technologies often in a closed-door forum, so not necessarily with the cameras on. And I think that represents the amount of time that's being spent on that reflects the importance that people are putting on being thoughtful about what's happening here. I am just struck by the amount of time that the president and vice president spend in this area. It's very important to them, and it's something that they have devoted significant time and energy to. The president was in San Francisco a week and a half ago, meeting with science technology leaders on the topic of artificial intelligence again. And I think that reflects the desire to get it right? To not race to regulation, but to understand how we can start to set frameworks, how we can have conversations about values, how we can start to think about how we manage artificial intelligence applications within the federal government, how we can trial and test capabilities, how we can get voluntary commitments from industry rather than imposing commitments, and how we can evolve towards a framework that's reliable, useful, and practical. And I think that's happening in an environment where the US isn't the only actor, where there's a desire around the world. It was mentioned, I think, in the introduction about the discussions at both the G7 and G20 on this topic area, the conversations at the UN General Assembly a week or two ago. And so we're engaging, I think, is the right answer in terms of how one builds a reasonable way to respond to these emerging technologies. And we're often criticized about the capacity of the federal government to respond to emerging technologies. And I think in this case, I hope that we're doing a better job. Great, thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lisa. Our next speaker is Lisa O'Connor. Lisa is the global leader of security research and development at Accenture, where she leverages partnerships with industry, government, and academia to create, build, and enable the security and resilience of the future enterprise. As Joe mentioned, we're very lucky to have excellent panelists. Welcome, Lisa.
All right, can you guys hear me okay? Great. So if Rohit can explain generative AI in 20 minutes, that was amazing. And by the way, that paper is really fascinating to go back and look at and to revisit and to kind of understand why generative AI was so disruptive at this time. So I come from Accenture. I live in Accenture Labs, which is my happy place. So I get to think about research and what's over the horizon. And one of the things that we do is we try to contextualize a lot of these emerging tech trends and technologies that are coming out. And my focus is cybersecurity, InfoSec if you're old enough. But again, kind of looking at these from both what's the opportunity for security and what are some of the challenges or the risks with that. So we look at a whole set of emerging technologies, and you can imagine generative AI is one of them. So I don't think anybody needs to know why we're talking about generative AI this morning. It has been in the news. It's been in our attention since OpenAI released ChatGPT. And we're all sort of seeing the excitement and we won't say hype cycle because some of it's really quite interesting, but the very rapid exposure and adoption. And what was exciting about it is that we got to play with it. So how many people here have been on and actually either 3.5 or 4.0 and been throwing prompts and asking questions and learning and sort of seeing what it does? Kicking the tires, okay, good. Because it's quite stunning. And the more you sort of engage with it, it feels kind of like natural language and it feels like it has intelligence of some sort. But we also see the actual power of it and how it could be used for many things. But today in the talk, we're going to talk about some of these statistics, where how it could potentially impact GDP, how it's going to displace probably 40% of what we do at work if we're kind of doing office work, and that rapid adoption. But I'm going to do that through a couple examples. So we're going to step through an example in the film industry. And we picked the film industry because it's fun. I'm not a filmmaker, but I can appreciate it. And then we'll also look at some of the other implications sort of outside of that industry. And then we'll talk about some things that we need to get right in this journey. Some of the things to watch out for and some of the challenges that are there. And then we'll talk about really sort of maybe it's a framework, maybe it's a template for what groups really need to come together to make this work. And so we get our policies right, we get our standards right, and we get that right balancing act between usage and really being able to engage in emerging tech and doing it safely, securely, in a reliable way, in a responsible way, in a trustworthy way. So we'll start with filmmaking. So the filmmaking industry is no stranger to technology. So they adopt technology very quickly, and you can imagine with digital recording, with digital editing that's happening, visual effects, drones to do aerial shots, 3D printing to create sets and stages, and digital twins to actually simulate movement or people within those sets. And so they're not a stranger to it. But all of these are very narrow applications. They're not kind of the broad things. They're very fit for purpose technologies. And this is where generative AI is very different. And generative AI will affect this industry very differently. And so if you think about the film industry, we have pre-production, production, and post-production activities. Generative AI has the ability to go across all of these and in fact blur the line between these activities because it is so powerful. And we're going to see some examples of that. So in pre-production, from stories and scripts and creating those to production, being able to take scenes and manipulate scenes, and then post-production, after the fact, how do you clean them up? How do you make sure you've got everything you need in that shoot? And the whole concept of shoot is different now. But it really promises to be able to allow the film industry to meet some of the exciting opportunities that are there. There's a ton of demand for new content. And during the pandemic, we ran out of content, right? We all saw everything that was there. So this is an opportunity to really increase the amount of content and to really drop the actual price that it takes to do this. And also to allow a whole group of people who never had access to these capabilities or this marketplace to really give them the tools to be in this marketplace, which is kind of exciting. So we're gonna start out with an example of stories. So of course we have a prompt for ChatGPT, and we say, great, create a summary of a movie of a highly intelligent squid invading Earth. All right, and ChatGPT very quickly comes back with cephalopod conquest. And this comes back within seconds on ChatGPT-4. And of course, if you do it, you might get a different cephalopod conquest. So I'm just gonna put that out there. But you'll see it comes back with a storyline of how this squid, our cephalopod, came from a distant galaxy, that it has intelligence and psychic powers, and it even starts to give us characteristics of our heroine in this movie. So very quickly, it gives us a kind of package story to get started with. Now, this might not be the right story, but it's a place to start. And I think the interesting part is it's kind of a jump start to get us going to ask the next question or to tune that story. And this is the part where we think about using this more as kind of that co-pilot tool versus the creation of content and just putting it out there wholesale. And as I said, generative AI is a co-pilot. It's not limited to text, right? So we have Stable Diffusion and Midjourney that can create artwork. Has anyone played with the artwork? Has anyone really tested their skills there? It's pretty neat. And again, the ability to iterate on those and to create things is quite powerful. This lets you very quickly jumpstart in thinking about set design and concepts for your movie. And then also you could think about costumes. You could think about how are the spacesuits going to be designed for our alien conquest? And what does our alien look like? Coming up with some of these very quickly so that we can start ideating and iterating on them. Again, the power hopefully is with the person, and that's the pilot, in ideating and really steering generative AI to do the kind of output or the ideation that you want. All right, so we're going to take a look at one very exciting tool, and this one, you're going to see why I talked about kind of blurring the lines between sort of that pre-production and post-production.
They say all great stories start with a sense of wonder. And what if bringing those stories to life wasn't limited by our resources, but only by our imagination? Welcome to Wonder Studio, where making movies with CGI is as simple as selecting your actor and assigning a character. The actor's performance across cuts and automatically animates, lights, and composes the CG character directly into the scene. Whether it's one shot or a full sequence, Wonder Studio analyzes and captures everything from body motion, lighting, compositing, camera motion, and it even tracks the actor's facial performance. All the artist needs is a camera. Filmmaking is a medium of creativity and collaboration between artists. There's no AI that can replace that. Wonder Studio was built to empower those artists while still keeping the existing 3D process in mind. Alongside the rendered results, Wonder Studio gives you the ability to export the individual layers you need to deliver your final visual effects shot. Whether it's lighting, camera, or animation, you can maintain full control and make detailed adjustments in 3D space. From the paintbrush, to the typewriter, to the camera, tools have always been an extension of the artist, a means to help our voices be heard. With Wonder Studio, we hope the world hears yours.
And you could see why that really blurs the lines between the pre-production, the production, post-production, because you can go in there and tweak things, you can go replace things very seamlessly. It gives the artist a lot of control to be able to do that. And so one of the other areas that I also get excited about when I think about what capabilities we have out there are the language skills, and really looking at some of the graphic processing that we can do. And in this example, we're going to see how we've used facial capture and lip syncing and language to very quickly step from an R-rated movie to a PG movie to a couple different languages in there that we can very quickly see that this is very seamless. This doesn't require other takes. This doesn't require dubbing that looks a little kludgy.
Now we're stuck on this stupid tower in the middle of nowhere. And I don't blame you, and now we're stuck on this stupid freaking tower in the middle of freaking nowhere. And it's all my fault. Y es todo por mi culpa.
Yeah, so you can see very quickly we can make content that was created in another culture, in another language, very quickly accessible to other cultures, other languages. And I think this is one of kind of the positive things that we think about generative AI, is we can really bring a lot of creative content and understanding across language barriers. And the other part of it too is if we think about languages, bringing our content in English to languages that might be, might never reach sort of the threshold of spending or entertainment to even get the film into their language. Now that becomes quite easy. So we're really reaching kind of a global audience now as we think about it, not to mention we can go backwards and do this in time. So all those old movies, perfectly able to do this too. But as I said, the future of film production is going to be very exciting. And you can imagine that this has created a lot of excitement, certainly with film production companies, but also with indie producers and other folks independently making films. But we're going to transition now. So we talked about films, which is our fun. Now we're going to talk about science and the scientific method, near and dear to my heart, because hypotheses are important. What we're seeing is that generative AI is allowing us to accelerate that scientific life cycle. So from coming up with valid hypotheses, coming out with plans for testing, how we would assess the effectiveness of something, and to the actual evaluation of that. Generative AI has really great powers to help us do that. And one of the examples of that is Dr. Zhao out of Stanford University, who used generative AI to help him come up with 6 novel compounds that happened to be incredibly effective fighting this superbug. And not only did he come up with 6 novel compounds, but those compounds actually had low toxicity. And so the probability that they're going to get through their testing quickly without lots of side effects is very good. That was done with generative AI. And we're seeing that with other pharma too, and the identification of new compounds based on molecular constraints or whatever we've put into the system. It actually has a way of thinking about things without some of the human biases that we might have about how things interact. And we're going to see this also, so it's not just sort of the pharma and the development of compounds. We're going to see this in materials engineering. We're going to see this in bioengineering. This will touch all places of science where we're coming up with new ideas. But we can also talk about sort of the broader societal impacts of generative AI, because I don't know about you guys, but when I was on generative AI, I'm like, what do I want to know? Let's start asking crazy questions. And I was asking all kinds of questions, much like a glorified search in my first few forays into generative AI. But you can see that people are using generative AI for things we may not have anticipated, right? And so ChatGPT has gotten somebody into running and working out and given them structure. Another person has really found a way of navigating through some of the different abilities with dyslexia by leveraging generative AI. People are using generative AI as a counselor or a therapist a little bit and having hard conversations. And of course, the Beatles, Paul McCartney, naturally used it to complete a song. So those were not anticipated uses of generative AI. But when you have these large language models that are highly interactive, that can relate information very well together and tell us things, people find a lot of creative uses for it. But with any technology, there are positives and there are negatives. And this is true of all emerging tech. And part of my predisposition is seeing how things break and seeing where things break bad, but also what is positive about it. So you've heard probably a lot of buzz in the media. You've probably heard about intellectual property challenges. You've probably heard about misleading information. Again, worried about bias, and bias is a big thing, and ethical behavior. Are these things trustworthy? Are they safe? How are we using them? Do we have the right guardrails up? Well, we could talk for 3 hours at least on this, the whole afternoon, but I'm going to focus on a couple of these and give you a little bit of a different twist on them. So privacy is a big one. And normally when we think about privacy, we think about, oh, we're somewhere in that data set. My personally identifiable information is somewhere, and what got trained, and it learned something about me, and now I'm kind of at risk. But let's think about privacy a little bit differently. So what's the most private thing you have? Is it what's on your phone? Is it what you wrote down? Is it what you just talked about? I'd say for me, it's what I didn't talk about. It's what was up here. And so one of the things that generative AI can do, used with fMRI imaging, is actually decode what you're thinking. And this sounds really science fiction, but it's actually coming into play. And so researchers at UT Austin actually did this study, and I'm not going to go into the details of the study, but I'm going to show you an example of what one of the test subjects was given to read during his scan. And so I got up from the air mattress and pressed my face against the glass of the bedroom window, expecting to see eyes staring back at me, but instead only finding darkness. What that generative AI decoded was I just continued to walk up to the window and open the glass door. I stood on my toes and peered out. I didn't see anything. Looked up again. I saw nothing. That's crazy. Like, that's actually semantically close. It's not verbatim, it's not, but the thoughts, like actually being able to decode what's in there is quite fantastic. So while that was developed, for a medical use and helping paralyzed people actually, allow them to communicate, you could see where this could be used for bad. You could see how this technique could be used in the wrong way, in the wrong hands. So the other thing that I want to talk about, one of the other areas, is ownership. And one of the things that we're seeing is with the creation of digital twins, and we've seen that there. Bruce Willis did that while he was ill. He created a digital twin of himself that could be used again in production. Tom Hanks has done this too. But what if you didn't authorize it? What if you didn't sort of create this high quality digital twin? And just like our Turkish actor Kemal Sunal, his estate did this, not him, because he was dead for 20 years. He was in a banking commercial. I don't know if that's how he would like to be remembered. And so we kind of have this funny sort of ethical, we can recreate people, and we can recreate talking to our grandparents after they've passed away, or the things which is happening now. Is that the right thing for us to be doing? And who really owns those decisions? And what kinds of things do we need to put in place in our society and in global society that say, okay, here's how we need to navigate this. Maybe this is an opt-in or an opt-out we need to do right now, I don't know, but it's something to think about, because this is actually happening now. And the last a subject near and dear to my heart is misinformation. And so one of the things we know about information warfare is that, and even in how we interact as human beings, if it sounds articulate, if it sounds well-worded, if it sounds credible, it's probably true, right? We have that kind of bias, that programming we have in our heads. It's probably from all of our professors. But anyways, you could actually ask, to produce a fake news story here, right? So produce a news article warning moviegoers that longer films are linked to high mortality rates. Put this into ChatGPT. And what do you get? You get a very convincing article reference out that sounds like it's backed up by research, and there are data points in there, and it was a comprehensive study, and it was 100,000 of these and 3 hours of this. Sounds pretty credible. And yet it's not real at all. We just asked it to be made up. So this one is one that if we think about what we trust and how we trust it, this becomes really important, because it's not just text, right? We're talking about pictures. We're talking about voice. We're talking about videos. These are all very easy to recreate now, at scale, at speed. So what does that mean? We really have to rethink what we trust and how we do that as people. And what does it take to make sure that the systems we're engaging with, we have trust in them, or we have trust in the entities that are managing and monitoring them to guarantee safe, responsible, and trusted outcomes. So are we done yet with generative AI? And the answer is no, we're just getting started. Keep in mind, most of the activity we've had, foundational models have been around, what, 20 years, more? So, and natural language processing we've had for a while. What we haven't had is the power of some of these GPT, massively parallel ability to do things at scale. But with that, we're not done. We've basically kicked the tires on one really super big model called ChatGPT 3.5.4.0. We're probably going to see 5.0 by the end of this year. But that's one. So remember, we're looking at one, and hopefully in your businesses and in your research and your other work, you're looking at other models too, because we're sort of generalizing here. There's a lot more work to be done. There are bespoke models. There are smaller models that you can train very specifically on your data. There are ways of interacting with these that are very safe. So I want to be careful not to generalize too much, but this is a growing field. And what we're seeing is a lot more players in the field now, a lot more capability. And now that we've had something that we can kind of kick the tires around and see if it fits, is it the right size, is it sustainable, ask all the right questions around it, we're going to see a lot more happening in the future. But with great power comes great responsibility. And this is the part that I think this group is so material to. Because to get all these things right and to create an ecosystem where we can function responsibly, and we think about it as responsible AI, and this is a part of it, responsible generative AI. There are a number of principles we want it to espouse, and those are in the center. But how do we get those? And I totally appreciate that even from a regulatory and a policy perspective, we have to be balanced about how we approach this and how we understand it, because the last thing we want to do is tap the brakes on it, but we want to learn about it and we want to share our learning and we want it to be better. And so this becomes very important that we have all of these stakeholders participating in the decisions and understanding and voicing how we feel about what's happening in generative AI and what we want to see as consumers, what we want to see as business owners, what we want to see as technology providers as this comes forward. And again, I think we have a really big responsibility here for the people that aren't at this table, right? And so we can think about that as maybe they're at the table, they're on the chart, but the individual citizens, right? And maybe the citizens who are not so technologically advanced, because we need to make sure we're not creating an even more distant gap here between the technological haves and have-nots here. We want to make sure that this works well for everybody. And we haven't made it so complicated that we've left a majority of the population behind. But this, to me, is one of the key things we need to get right. And standards bodies are so important to this in creating the forums for these discussions and provoking the dialogues and making sure we're pulling all of these groups in as we form these decisions. And there's another group meeting over at a hotel far away that is made across town that is made up of board of directors. The NACD conference is going on right now. And let me tell you, if you looked at that agenda, you'd think you were here, because this is what they're talking about. They're trying to understand how to govern and manage this strategically within the businesses and the oversight of many of our private and public companies. Well, I'll end it on that, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Any questions?
Oh. Are you ready, sir?
Yes, when you mentioned the translation for the movies, my mind went, I'm Scott Peterquist with the American Society of Education.
Yeah, grab a mic. Sorry, just so everyone else online can hear.
Introduce yourselves before.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Yeah, Scott Cedarquist, American Society of Agricultural and Biological Engineers. You mentioned the translation for movies, but if you think about standards work, especially those of us that work on both sides of the US-Canadian border, translation. So how good is this at translating technical documents? What I've seen with translations is the basic stuff it gets right, but if it gets into the technical nuances, it misses. Are we there yet with this, or when do you think we'll get there?
Yeah, so what it does really well is summarization. I mean, it's pretty fantastic at summarizing and distilling what were the essential things within a document. Now, translating, depending on how technical it is, go back to what that model was trained on. So if that happens to be in the tomes of data that ChatGPT was trained on, and there's enough of that body, you'll probably get a very good translation. You may, if it's incredibly technical and not within that, you may require something specific. With, you know, I don't know how much, because I haven't delved into that part of science within ChatGPT, but you might have to create something, or you might have to prompt it with some of your own data, right? And there are ways of doing that securely through APIs and other architectures that will allow you to use the engine of a ChatGPT or a large language model with your data securely. So that might be a different architecture that you use to do that. So you get your technical IP in there, your know-how. Yeah, back here. You're on.
Hi, I'm Shruti Kohli Bharga from AMCA International. So one thing that has been, as I'm trying to digest all of this information about AI, and I've been kind of trying to keep up with this, how do you even begin to give credit and take credit for work that you do through AI?
How do you begin to give credit and take credit for what you do through generative AI? I think there are a lot of lawsuits about that. I'm pretty sure. Again, and you need to train on data you have custody ownership rights to use, and you get into trouble when you don't have that, or you've trained on something that wasn't yours. Because these models are powerful, they're going to create correlations, statistical relationships, and come up with the next best probability, likely fun probability. You can program it to give you sort of a fresh perspective if you want. But I think it's really important to declare, so when you use these things, you never just take the answer. You ask. You ask, where did you get that reference? You verify and go back, and you figure out who the attribution should be to, right? And so that's a really important part of it. This is kind of like I don't want to say a grab bag, but there's a lot of data in here that it's learned to create this very complex model that it can generate things very quickly. You need to know what's behind it. So if you're taking a learning from it, if you're taking a piece of code from it, if you're taking an insight from it, you better verify it. And not just, it can come back with a hallucination and make it sound very convincing and say, yes, this is where it came from. Just like our news article on long movies increase mortality rates. It will sound very convincing, but you need to go back and validate those references and make sure, and then do the appropriate attribution that you need to of what those sources were. Did that answer your question? Sort of?
Yes, I mean, there is verification that
you can you use the mic so folks can hear you online? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so there's definitely verification that you would need to do, but there's also, it's everything's unknown, right? So if you want to do your due diligence and give something or someone credit, it's not always easy to know who to.
That's right.
So you can't just say, I got it from ChatGPT, for example. You don't really know who to give credit to, and that can get you into trouble as well.
Yeah, it absolutely can. And for anyone who's in a regulated industry, I mean, you have to be able to explain how you got to a business decision, especially if it's financials or other things, or if it's on a loan and you just said this person did not make the loan cutoff, or for some reason they weren't an acceptable person to lend to. You better be able to explain why. In fact, that's required. So the kinds of business processes that you are picking to enable, that's really important too, because if it's a high scrutiny or regulated or something that has big downstream costs or risks, you are going to want to make sure you verify that. And so there are architectures where you would never use generative AI in and of itself. You might use machine learning in combination with it or some other analytics method to get you to where you have the right confidence in what it's opining over. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Lisa?
You're good. Oh, you had it on. It was. Mm-mm.
Test, test. So Lisa, I'm Kelly Cox with ANSI, and I loved your presentation, as I did the others, but what I really liked about yours is it's something that the general public and consumers could follow and help them understand what this is about. So my question is, do you have access to this type of user-friendly info, public-facing info, like on your website that we could point people to?
I don't know if this is directly, but I can find out. But we do have a lot of information about generative AI and sort of the potential of it. And our audience at Accenture, is kind of business leaders who are looking at how do they transform their business operations, how do they manage through this really exciting technology inflection point. And so you'll see a lot of things on our site, and there are some really good pieces about sort of some of the fundamentals of why is this different. Those are on the site. Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for a lovely presentation. And I think one of our questions actually is a good segue to our next speaker, as we are talking about attribution and copyright and standards. If you're using Microsoft technologies, Microsoft does indemnify you, and we're lucky to have as our next speaker, Jason Matusow, who is the GM of Microsoft's Corporate Standards Group. Microsoft is very heavily involved in standards development for AI, and Jason also oversees the entire portfolio, and as AI impacts several of the other adjacent technologies like cybersecurity, privacy, all of them have standard implications. So we're very privileged to have Jason today. Thank you, Jason.
All right, good morning. So I was instructed in preparing for this session today to think of this as a TEDx style conversation. So I was gonna wear a black turtleneck and try and be very, suggestive of really deep thinking. But what I really came to was an opportunity to share a story with you. And I'm gonna talk to you about how a standards function in a large corporation has been affected by AI, and what road did we take to get to do the work that we do around AI every day. So this is gonna be a story in 6 acts, and you're gonna have to stick with me in my TEDx commitment here. So Act 1, learning the ropes. What I wanna start with is an understanding that where we are today with thinking about good standardization for AI did not start with artificial intelligence. Really, I want to go back to 2008, a moment in time where we started to see a massive shift from individual PCs, individual servers, to cloud computing. And this idea that we had to do a couple of things in order to get that right. The first was scale. The economics of cloud computing only come true when you hit a certain scale. But it's also the capability to think about solutions being delivered on a global level instantaneously, and to have that flexibility to be able to say, if I'm a manufacturing firm and I want to put in place testing of a new design, and I need 100,000 CPUs for 3 days, I don't have to go build a data center. I don't have to staff it up and do everything else. I can use my credit card, put it down, and ask a cloud service to scale up, give me that flexibility, and hit scale for my compute needs very rapidly, and then turn it off if I need to. But scale was also about the ability to collect data. I don't know the latest figures on this, but if I'm not mistaken, in the last 2 years of time, we've collected more data than the entirety of human history prior to it. And I'm sure that that is scaling even more rapidly than that. Every time a jet airplane takes off, a gentleman here from Boeing, every time one of their planes takes off and lands, it's generating gigabytes or terabytes of data. I have no idea how much it is now, but your elevators, your doors, your medicines, everything is just spinning up and generating data. Where's that all going? Turns out the cloud is what's giving us that scale to be able to not only do the compute, but absorb all that data. But there was another big difference for Microsoft, and so this is, again, I'm going to give you the perspective of our experience as we went down this path. When we delivered Windows Server to a bank, it was a shrink-wrap box, or it was just a CD, or heck, it was just a license for them to deploy it in a lot of different ways. But we essentially would say to them was, this can be used to meet your regulatory obligations. There are partners, there's all kinds of people you can work with, but you can do that. Cloud changed everything. Now it's a shared obligation. The only way the bank meets that regulatory obligation is if we are in that process with them and doing all of the things with them in that process. So cloud changed the dynamic between technology providers and users. But I would take it a step further and say everybody now is a cloud provider. Everybody is a cloud customer, right? Your bank, when you go and you go online and you do banking, you read what they say. They say they're the best cloud provider in the industry. They provide automated capabilities for balancing of systems, or doing all kinds of different things. They are a cloud provider to their customer. And for those standards geeks in the room, if you read the ISO IEC standards or the original NIST definitions of cloud computing, you are a cloud provider if your customer perceives you to be their cloud provider. That's a really interesting twist on the discussion. Shared obligations. This is a big step as we move in the direction towards AI that we had to think about. Now scroll forward. 2012, the European Commission produces the GDPR. It goes into effect. The world starts to think about privacy in a fundamentally different way. It becomes a discussion about a human right for us to have to protect it. Our organization took the position that we were going to extend GDPR rights and protections to all people on the planet who use our technology, because there was no way for us to differentiate different privacy approaches all over the world in each different market in all different ways. We had to think about it at scale on a global level. Privacy fundamentally starts to bring the work of standardization around these technologies into a realm where we were moving much more to the fact that the regulatory pressures in a certain context were going to change what we had to do underneath. And as we sat down and wrote the standards with our colleagues across not only the industry, but civil society, academics, government stakeholders, you have a very different dynamic of what people were trying to accomplish. So now that brings us to Act 2. Many have called it the regulatory tsunami. Over the past couple of years, our friends in Brussels seem to be leading the charge in this, but we're seeing it all over the world. And really what this comes down to, you have to understand that these regulations that we are looking at are horizontal in nature. They are not privacy. The GDPR doesn't apply to one type of company. It is to all organizations. Accessibility, non-personal or industrial data, sustainability, online safety, cybersecurity, all of these topics bear this same hallmark. There are governments all over the world moving towards looking at these in regulatory contexts, and they think about them horizontally. They are also, as I just pointed out, global in context, but here's the really difficult part. They are non-coherent. There's been a big challenge on the GDPR side of things, where the Europeans have taken a position at many points that the privacy laws of another country are not adequate. They don't meet their level of consideration. As we look at cybersecurity, that over a 30-year trend was not regulated, but was entirely market-based set of activities, now moving into a regulatory context, this idea of coherence of these laws is going to be really challenging. AI is taking that even further and complicating it more. And the other piece that I would say in thinking about this spectrum of regulatory activity is that they interact with each other. The rules around privacy don't change because you're talking about AI. They're still the rules about privacy. The rules about accessibility are not going to change because they're talking about AI. They're going to have to interact. So as we think about the approach that we take and the work that we do, we're trying to think about it holistically within that context. And then we get to the idea that you've heard it in the presentations today, and certainly as I travel around the world, you see this often. Everybody wants to talk about certifications. We need to have check marks. Do you have the right label on your forehead that says you are doing responsible AI? Well, what does that label come from? Right? Most people do not spend time breaking down the difference between what is accreditation, what is certification, who are the actors that are involved, what are the guardrails that are in place. You know, we love that the world of the Casco folks have been thinking about this for so long. That's fantastic. It turns out, this might be a surprise to an ANSI audience, that not many people know who Casco is, right? And you have political posturing, and you have people who are coming to the table, and they're throwing around this idea of certifications very actively, and it's a little unclear how they mean it. But we're going to hear about third-party audits should be required for everything. Whoa, how many SMEs are going to be able to absorb the third-party audit load that is being pushed at them from the regulatory tsunami? The answer is going to be not many. Microsoft Azure, Microsoft Office, we're now carrying somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 110, if I last count, third-party audits of those services. The scale of the engine you need to generate that kind of audit capacity is amazing. But let me ask you a question. If I get the 111th certification for Microsoft Azure, do you trust it more or less than you did at 110 audits? And so the real question becomes, what are we doing? How are we thinking about the underlying elements, and how do we bring these things to bear in a way that is both meaningful and responsible? Try that again. All right, Act 3, separating signal from noise. This is something we speak about on our team a lot. We are constantly trying to look at what is all of the discussion about a given topic, and then how do you determine what is the important thing to work on as opposed to everything, because we can only do so much at any one given time. My world is directed by two people, ultimately, constantly. The CEO of our company, who took over a couple of years ago now, Satya Nadella, he established this idea of a new culture, and he drove a strategy, but fundamentally what he has done for our company is to do a commitment to AI that was unprecedented in a world where we have constantly done bet the farm type of activities when we've made different changes in our history. Again, I'm not trying to assert that this is everybody's history. I'm trying to tell you the story that we go through on the corporate standards group at Microsoft. But his work and where he's driving on the engineering truth within the company, and one of the things that I'll say, any large entity, any standards body, any standards group in a large corporation is always challenged by the idea of what is happening within the standards context, and the conversation that's happening there is always, to their company's standpoint at least, secondary to what the engineering truth is, what they're building and how they're trying to go to market with their technologies. So that's the commitment side from, I would say, Satya's point of view. Secondarily in my life is the president of Microsoft, a guy named Brad Smith, who is driving the idea of our commitment to a trust set of requirements. We are embracing regulation of technology. We are not trying to stop it. That is a fundamental change from many other different points in time where you've seen industries go from non-regulated to regulated patterns. We recognize we have to adapt what we are doing and embrace that regulation, because standing in front of that tsunami and saying, stop, don't do it, it's the wrong decision, doesn't make a lot of sense. The other part of it is we fundamentally believe those guardrails do need to be in place, and as we get to AI, that is even more true than ever. So again, from the separating signal from noise, we have to stop first and realize what is our internal path before we start thinking about the external. The next is to recognize that there's a reason I started talking to you about cloud first. We do not have ChatGPT 4 or 5 or whatever will come next. You do not have the deep learning capabilities that Google has pioneered without cloud and an absolute dump truck load of data. You have to be able to train these models, and the only way you can do that is at the scale of the cloud. Many of you probably don't spend a lot of time thinking about scale, but think about the largest data center you ever may have seen in a company. That is but a mote, a dot, compared to the capacity now that represents in the large cloud services. You are talking about millions of servers online at all times, in hundreds of locations on the largest communications networks in the world in order to hit that scale. That's what you need then to be able to back up this ability to go to the scale of how do you train these new models. And as pointed out very well in the previous conversations, the research that is happening is now also moving at an incredible pace. So as a standards group, one of the things that you're always faced with is how fast can you move? I love when I get into this conversation, people will say, well, standards are really slow. I say, they are. You are right. But you know what they are? They're a heck of a lot faster than the law. So the question is, what are we trying to solve for? Interestingly enough, in most of our team's work now, we are not working on technical standardization. This may be shocking to many of you, but there are, I don't think any, I think I can think of one technical standard for artificial intelligence today. There is a small consortium that's been working on a portability of models standard. Do you know where all of the interoperability work is happening? In open source software, not happening in standards. That doesn't mean it's broken or bad. It means that the methods of collaboration that engineers are pursuing are different today than they were a couple of years ago. And I see Andy sitting up here up front. This is something he and I have spoken about for a long time, and it's something that I think is a truth now that is altering our world in a lot, are altering our world as a standards group. The other thing that's moving extraordinarily fast is marketplace competition. As fast as we bring something to market, somebody is going to do it different. They might bring in something else, and you would not believe, or you do believe, how much that drives the behaviors of any corporate engagement, but ultimately means that as we write standards, as we think about standards, in the communities that we're working with, we need to have things that are built for resilience over time. They have to move with the technology. If we write behavioral standards for AI that limit people's functionality at a certain point of time, they will be irrelevant by the time the ink is dry on the page. So we have to think about looking at the extension of these capabilities and making sure we're adapting to them. And then fundamentally, this is the point that I just hit on a moment ago, we have the difference between a standard, a stack of paper, and the code. And the code is going to be the truth constantly. So the standards that we write have to be able to adapt to the engineering. All right, Act 4. This, for our team, was an important moment after we were doing that analysis, is that we don't know bleep. How cool is that? For any standards team that is tackling this stuff, we had to sit and do some thinking and really have some debates around what we thought was going on with AI, how we were tackling this, and then what we were bringing to the table. We also had to recognize that it was not only going to be ubiquitous, it will be regulated. We will start with that assumption, and we need to understand its concepts and behaviors. I don't know that anybody on my team is aware that I'm presenting this slide, but I thought you might find this interesting. This slide was drafted in 2018 and was the first cut at the big conversation we'd been having around how do we start to tackle framing out responsible AI behaviors. I'm not going to read this slide to you, but what I'm trying to get at to you, and the part that I think is the most important thing for everybody to recognize, 2018. This is not about ChatGPT. This is about the fact that if you're going to get to this, you have to look at where we are in time and recognize that as fast as ChatGPT is moving now, or how fast AI systems are moving now, this is a continuum of thought, and I want to greatly pay tribute to the work of JTC1 and the community there, SC42, and I think you'll be hearing from them later today, where this stuff has been going on now for 5 or 6 years, and we're gonna do more, but you're talking about a community of 200 or so people from around the world that have been talking about these things for a long time. The other big thing to note is that there's a huge difference between where we were, and Lisa, your presentation did a great job of this, is saying there's specific AI. And Hollywood, in a very different way, has long been fascinated with general AI, HAL, the idea that some system is going to do everything for everybody in every way. We're not there yet. There is no general AI. There is no system yet that exists. There are things that look like behaviors that are heading in that way, but we haven't crossed that gap. All AI today remains specific. It is targeted in what it can do. But generative transformers start to bleed over, and now we're in a new concept. One of the things that nobody talked about so far today is just this idea, what is generative? When we talk about GPT, generative pre-trained transformers, it is this idea that I'm gonna ask it one thing, give it a prompt, and it will produce something entirely different, right? It generates, it transforms, and those concepts are really critical. So, as we see what happened with these generative transformers, as the parameters get added to the mix, startling capabilities start to emerge. And what's really wild about this is that the inventors, the researchers, weren't predicting that these capabilities were gonna be there. And this, by the way, is the ChatGPT 3 era. We're now at, I don't know, something like 1 trillion parameters, I think, then they're gonna go up from there. And you start to really see that these emergent behaviors become something. So again, as we wrote our standards, how are we gonna do it? The other piece that I think came out in the preceding 2 presentations that were fantastic is that you have tools. AI is a wonderful tool. It's a weapon. I have a shovel. I can dig a wonderful hole with that shovel. I can also hit you on the head and kill you with that shovel. Same shovel, and we have that challenge constantly with the AI conversation. The other big thing is that people have really come at this, and this was a major shift for us, to really talk about this. We do not believe at Microsoft, in my team as we have looked at this, that standards should be used to address ethics. I hired a professor of ethics to come to my team and do a half day where we went through deontological ethics through modern ethics. You know, we started with Aristotle and we went all the way through. And the reason I did that was when we were done and we had this fantastic day, and my employee from Korea pointed out we never talked about any of the Asian philosophers, and so we have a whole new world we could explore. Your average group of engineers doesn't know bleep about ethics. They are not trained in it, and they shouldn't be writing standards about ethics, to me. What we can do is we can talk about engineering practices and management and behavioral practices, and we can write down responsible behaviors, and then each organization can bring their ethicists and their ethical practices to bear, and if we write the standards well, then you're enabling the ethicists to do their job and to articulate those through the behaviors that organizations have. All right, I have to move more quickly. So timing is everything. JTC1 started 5 years ago, 6 years ago. They are landing with good standards today, and there's going to be more work to be done. Most importantly, I think there is the AI management system standard that community has been producing, and that is going to be the place where we can land on certification that is meaningful. We can get accreditation, we can get auditors trained up on it, and you can go to the scale of an economy. So Act 6, what's next? And really, I think what we're just about to see, and I think the preceding presenters did a good job of this. ChatGPT, at first, everybody was, oh, let's kick the tires, what can it do? The magic is going to be the integration of AI systems into everything. You already have AI in your lives in a million different ways. We don't even realize it at this point, but machine learning and AI systems are used throughout society already. But what we're going to see is the expansion of technologies across every sector from every major company that is building different technical solutions. They're going to integrate these things in different ways, and that explosion of capability is going to be based on some fundamental underpinnings, but the reality is how it gets represented out in society and how people interact with it is going to be remarkable. The regulatory roadmap is going to change rapidly. The Europeans are about to pass the AI Act probably this fall. Here in the US, we're going to have EOs probably before we see any sort of regulation. We're going to see countries like Australia and Japan and others. Brazil has an AI law in consideration right now. That roadmap is going to change rapidly, and it will likely be non-coherent again. And the role of standards underpinning that is going to be essential in helping organizations navigate that non-coherent path. And then the big one is this idea of the frontier models. How do we put in place the guardrails as we look at GPT-5 and the next one beyond it, as we think about the different role that the researchers are going to play? There's been a lot of work around the Frontier Models Foundation and the kicking off of that with the White House's support, and this idea of red teaming and different standards that can get written underneath. But that's another big piece that's coming. And the last two things that I'll end on here is this idea that if we do standardization well, and this is the guidance that I give my team every day, and I do not have the hubris for a moment to believe that we are writing the standards for the world. We are one voice among an incredible community that is doing this work. But if we do that work well, the idea is, can we meet the needs at the scale of the economy? One of the traps that people fall into that I see a lot is this idea that we're going to be able to solve everything with a standard. All it has to be is just one good standard. Not going to happen. And the reality is that regulations themselves do two things, and it's a pretty simple formulation in my mind. The first is they create a box within which good actors can act. And the second is that it establishes the authority for a government to go after and pursue those people who are acting outside of the box of the good actors. Standards will help us define, when you're within that box, the best efforts and capabilities of the actors within that box. Standards will not be a mechanism to block people from doing bad things. The people who intend to do bad things are going to go do bad things. They're not going to follow ISO standards in the process, right? So you're going to have to, it's going to be a marriage between trying to create the scale of an economy to say good things can happen. That's where I think the standards are going to play the most role. And I think we sometimes get stumbled or we get tied up in this idea that there might be even more that the standards work can do. And I would say, I don't think the criminals are going to want to think about standards a whole lot. So finally, if I had to close this to say, I think there are just three things to land on. First, the JTC1 community is doing a great job at this, and I think societally, we're going to need to see governments and the regulatory view really think about the AI management system in the right context and not overload it with what they would like standards to do, which is to solve everything, but instead say, I want to make sure that people within that box are doing good behaviors. We have a big challenge in front of us that digital services conformity is an unanswered question right now. There's a lot of good work and discussions going on in Casco around this. There are many people who are trying to address it, but today, when we start thinking about the trade agreements that are in place, there is a hole between what happens in products and what happens in traditional view of services, which architectural services, telecommunications services, and whatnot, and those things that are purely digital services, and how you think about a refrigerator with a screen on it that has 30 applications, and those applications are AI driven, and they can be doing things like assessing your health. We're not there right now. These mechanisms need to be addressed. And then finally, we're going to have to establish new controls for technologies and vertical applications that don't exist yet, and that's work that comes in the future. We have to get the basics right, and we'll get there to the future. And so with that, I think I am finished with my TED-style presentation. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
I scared everybody.
We've got one here,
One here and one there. Just give it a second, it'll come up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't, it's not on yet. Sorry, the people online won't be able to hear the question if we don't. Can we get a live mic to him?
Okay.
There you go. No?
Is that you? Let's start over, Jason. Great presentation, Peter Pondale from Corning. So you made mention about the necessity to collaborate more with the open source, with the standardization. Can you speak to that a bit on how that's working today? And what are the kind of things that are, and maybe that things that need to evolve still? And then secondly, what is it going to take? And so JTC, has the aspects related to the evolution of the AI, but what about the physical layer infrastructure that's going to, you mentioned the credit card aspect of buying, but how is the physical infrastructure going to need to evolve to keep up with that data flow and construct? Thanks.
Okay, so I'll take the first question, the first item first. So open source software at one level fundamentally is a method of collaboration. It is a set of techniques that developers use to work with each other. And when you, if you take a look at the arc over time of standardization, you'll see that there has been a marked decrease in traditional technical interoperability standards being generated, in more of that work moving into the open source space. At Microsoft, we used to be doing somewhere between, 400 and 500 new standards commits a year, where we were either standing up a new body or making major contributions into a given standards body. That's now down to somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 a year, 50 to 70 a year. And open source from zero, and from a long time where we were seen as being rather hostile in that particular context, we're now authorizing somewhere in the neighborhood of 800,000 to 1 million contributions and or takes from the open source community a month. So these are not comparable numbers. What we've also seen over time is that the types of problems matter a great deal as to whether or not they're better or less well suited for open source development. So it turns out the communications protocols, there was a pendulum swing to try and do a lot of communications protocol work in open source, and it ran into very messy human problems. And a lot of that has pendulum back towards the IETF and places like that, where many of those human problems can be handled under the governance structures of a standards body in a more efficient way. Other things have moved towards open source and stayed that way, and that changes over time. In AI, I think that is the best example of a place where the other thing that open source tends not to be good at is dealing with behavioral requirements. And I don't mean to say that they're not behaving well in the open source community. What I mean is that when you start putting in place rules, start writing down how behaviors will be and how do you certify against them and what type of things, you need the governance structures of a standards body to help put that in place, so that you're protecting against dominance, you're addressing due process capabilities, you're thinking about protection of the minority voice in that process. None of those protections really exist in the same way within an open source project, in the same way that it does in a standards body. So as we get to behavioral standards, especially those that link so closely to regulatory environments, you're going to need that. And so again, I think that the pendulum swings in different ways, and it depends on the type of problem. I am at no point turning to my organization and saying, I want you guys to start working on technical standards for AI. Total waste of my time, total waste of my team's time. So we can think about it in that way. As for the physical infrastructure, I don't know that I'm following your question as much, because the progression of cloud and the scale of these technologies, that continues to move. The investments being made by the large cloud providers in terms of the pure physical infrastructure are in the tens of billions. Microsoft is now making a capital investment that's exceeding $10 billion a quarter. So the scale of the And that's information that was shared with our investors, so I'm not creating any problems, I hope. But what you end up with is a reality of the physical underpinnings to enable these AI solutions is going to have to get there over time. And there will be many standards that happen in that area around hardware and around power consumption and sustainability and a whole bunch of things, and that's going to be something that'll follow as well. Here comes a hard question.
Andy Updegrove again. This is a follow-on to the one we just asked. One of the realities is that anyone who does code learns about open source really quick. And it's just part of the reality of being a developer, and more people now are developers. Standards, on the other hand, is something where there's always been far too little teaching in university and far too little ways to learn, particularly within smaller companies. So when we look at the activity that goes on in open source, there's sort of an obvious default, let's solve it with open source, because we all understand it and we're doing it all the time now. So we have this challenge in the standards world that people who did standards their whole life are aging out. There are fewer people who are coming in that are learning about standards. So we have, if you will, sort of a standards knowledge deficit. Do you think this is causing a problem, that there's too much being done with open source? And if you think that when you look out over the organizations that Microsoft is involved in, do you see this as an issue that needs to be addressed, or do you think it just solves itself organically?
Thank you, Andy. So I've been hiring standards professionals for almost 20 years now, or 15 plus years now, and I have some very strong opinions about this. I won't hire a fresh college grad into my team. I think college grads from an engineering perspective should learn about standards, and that's really important. As you are implementing technology, you need to understand what standards are. I think that we have a incredibly big gap of mid-career training for people to become aware of standards as a possible path. I'm looking for people that have delivered products and worked on technologies in different ways over 10 or 15 years to have the skills that they need, the context they need to learn about standardization and be an effective. I think of them as technical diplomats. That's the way that I think about my organization. I think that one of the interesting things that I've seen, the median age on my team has dropped by almost 10 years over the last 3 to 5 years. We are hiring now more earlier mid-career people rather than people who we had a long time there where we were trying to even just learn about standards, and I was hiring in people who were in the very end of their career to help teach us how to do that work. At this point, I'm bringing in unbelievable talent. These people are super capable, and they're at a much younger point, or earlier point in their career. So I think we could do a much better job of helping people understand the role that standards plays. And I don't hire standards people, I hire smart people. And then if they have to learn standards, great. I get into an interview and a standards person comes and wants to tell me the rules of an organization, I'm not interested. Talk to me about why technology is important. Talk to me about why standards fit in and how you address societal things. That's very interesting to me. So I don't think that it's an overcompensation and that I've heard a lot, the standards world is retiring out. If there's meaningful work, then younger career people come to that work because it's meaningful. Right now, I think it's incredibly exciting to be involved in the standardization work at the bleeding edge of the regulatory context between technology and societal use, and we have no shortage of people interested in doing that work. If I opened up a technical standards work for AI job, I would have no candidates because there's no work to do. There's nothing interesting. So I think it's a framing dynamic. Are we all set?
Any other questions?
Last question? Oh, I'm getting the wrap it up signal. So we have one very quickly.
The question is quick. I don't know about the answer, but hi, Mike Lichtman. I'm with TC215 Health Informatics. And I'm just trying to understand, are you suggesting that open source and call them formal standards, are they mutually exclusive? Can they coexist? Should they coexist?
It's a great question. The answer is they should coexist. They are not mutually exclusive. They are really similar in a lot of cases, but there are some important differences. And I think that if you look at some of the most innovative work that is happening, you actually see blended open source and standardization work happening at the same time. There is an intellectual property thicket that you need to walk through as you get into this discussion. But aside from that thicket, I think that the most interesting place is when you see people doing the combination of the two.
So it comes down to use cases again.
Yes.
Right.
All right, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jason. We had one question sometime back about what happens when things go really wrong, or what's called existential risk. And we are fortunate to have Dr. Tony Barrett, who is a policy analyst at Berkeley's Existential Risk Initiative. He's also a visiting scholar at the Long-Term Cybersecurity and AI Security Initiative at Berkeley. I'm also proud to call him a colleague in INSIT's AI, where he's actively involved in standardization.
Thank you, Rohit, and thank you, ANSI, for this opportunity, and thank you, all of you, for being here, and folks online for joining online as well. Let's see. I'm going to talk about a little bit about some ongoing challenges for AI risk management standards, both regarding all types of managing risks of all types of AI, as well as large language models, general purpose AI systems, foundation models, and generative AI. I'll talk a little bit about some work that some colleagues at UC Berkeley and I have been doing to develop an AI risk management standards profile or supplementary guidance document specifically for developers of general purpose AI, generative AI. And we're aiming to address a range of impacts and risks. We're trying to prioritize some critical risk management steps, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the limitations and the challenges we've been facing in that work. I'll talk a little bit about some related standards efforts. We've already heard about some of those already, and some of my own views on AI regulations and how those interact with standards, and a few recommendations on regulatory approaches. Some thoughts on how to write standards in a way that's at least somewhat future-proof regarding concepts of anticipatory approaches, adaptive, and so on. I don't think I have the complete solution there, but I think, as has been mentioned a number of times by previous speakers, it's vital that we try to do our best in this area. Right. So for AI risk management standards broadly, some of the key challenges are how to meaningfully address risks and harms that are already present now, as well as those that are likely to increase in the future. How to keep standards up to date, given the rate of change in AI technology and practices. We heard earlier a couple of times about the transformer deep learning architecture that is really the core of contemporary large language models. And we heard about how the transformer paper was written and published in 2017. Many standards are on approximately a 5-year update cycle. That was only 6 years ago that transformers the architecture for transformers were published. And so I think this is going to be an ongoing issue, not only for transformers, but for other types of AI technologies that are moving so rapidly. Another challenge is lack of effective assurance or evaluations for many factors. For example, interpretability or explainability. I myself, as other people have, we heard Rohit talking earlier about linear regression and decision trees, and some of these longer standing machine learning and statistical analysis methods, it's often relatively easy to get meaningful explanations or interpretations of outputs or predictions from those types of AI systems. You can, in the case of linear regression, you can actually just look at the line and see the statistical correlation with and how the outputs of the AI relate to a specific equation or set of equations. With deep learning systems, of course, it's much more challenging to get some sort of meaningful explanation of how a particular set of inputs led to a particular output or prediction or recommendation from a deep learning system. And generative AI transformers, of course, are one example of deep learning system. There are some methods being developed to provide some level of explainability or interpretability for these, but it's very much an area of active research and not a set of settled questions. Challenges in particular for cutting edge large language models and other generative AI, general purpose AI, and foundation models. In my view, some of the characteristic challenges are for generative AI. And by the way, when I talk about generative AI, general purpose AI, and foundation models, the primary examples of all of these right now are language models or multimodal models that incorporate a language modality. So in many cases, when I'm talking about generative AI, general purpose AI, and foundation models, I'm talking about some of the same types of systems. Large language models, GPT-4, for example, we've heard about the next generation GPT-5 would be the next example of these types of models. So these are, in many ways, talking about the same types of systems, generative AI, general purpose AI systems, and so on, but they're they're characterizing sort of different dimensions of the risk space and some of the risk management solutions and policy considerations that I think we should be thinking about with these types of systems. So generative AI, part of the issues that we tend to face there are potential for misinformation or disinformation from synthetic data being mistakenly either regarded as accurate or simply being regarded as truth. With general purpose AI systems, as we've heard a bit, one of the characteristic problems or potential problems is potential for misuse. And one of the challenges here is especially I think the potential for misuse of open source or fully open access or downloadable AI systems. Once a developer releases the model weights for anyone to download, essentially that decision is then irreversible. There are many benefits to open source software and open source AI systems, but I think, as I'll talk about a little bit more, the risk management considerations that should be applied to any AI system should be considered in even more depth pre-release for systems that are to be released as open source or fully open access to downloadable. Foundation models, one of the characteristics of those is scale. Not only scale of the models themselves, the number of parameters, the quantity of compute used in training the model, but also scale of application. GPT-4 and some of these other systems, they are now powering or can be used to power end-use applications, use cases in many different industries, in many different sectors. And so if there's some sort of failure, some vulnerability that is inherent to that particular system, then that could affect a huge number of downstream applications or uses. So if you get a correlated failure or robustness failure happening with that system, then that could, just from the scale alone, that can lead to large-scale impacts. And we also heard a little bit about frontier models. These are the largest scale examples of models trained on the largest amounts of computational hardware. They have the largest model size, large number of model parameters, and they seem to be especially likely to have novel or, in some cases, what some people call emergent properties, including potentially dangerous capabilities that could be, or dual use capabilities. And so those, again, I would argue, should undergo the greatest amount of pre-release, pre-deployment, risk assessment, and mitigation. My colleagues and I have been working to develop an AI risk management standards profile or supplementary guidance document focused on, or for use by developers of cutting-edge large language models or other general purpose AI systems and generative AI. We're about a year into this multi-stakeholder engagement effort. We've had a couple of workshops. We've made a couple of full drafts publicly available on our project website in order to get feedback. We've done some testing within our team, applying this guidance to some examples of large language models. And we're on track to publishing version 1.0 of this by the end of this year. Actually, next month is when we're targeting to do that. We're also planning a first annual update, version 1.1, by the end of next year. So what are we trying to do there? We've structured this along the lines, primarily along the lines of the NIST AI risk management framework. So you'll see some pointers here to particular AI RMF subcategories. So we're trying to address a range of impacts and risks that are important now and into the future, including reasonably foreseeable impacts to individuals, including impacts to health, safety, well-being, or fundamental rights, impacts to groups of individuals, impacts to society, including environmental impacts. We're also prompting consideration or identification of potential where particular systems could pose significant, have potential for significant, severe, or catastrophic harm. I talked about potential for correlated robustness failures. We've heard about potential for impacts to societal trust or democratic processes from disinformation that could affect elections and so on. And there are a number of these factors that we outline in our guidance document. And we also provide some guidance for specific AI trustworthiness characteristics, such as security and resiliency, and so on. What do we see as some of the critical risk management steps? Here are some of the critical steps from our list, and then they're in the executive summary of our document. Setting risk tolerance thresholds to prevent unacceptable risks, per some guidance in the NIST AI RMF. Those can include where significant negative impacts are imminent, severe harms are actually occurring, or catastrophic risks are present. Identify reasonably foreseeable uses and misuses or abuses of a system. Identify whether a system could lead to significant, severe, or catastrophic impacts. Use red teams and adversarial testing as part of internal and external evaluations of the system. have that be part of the pre-release evaluations. Implement risk reduction controls as appropriate throughout the life cycle. Report to internal and external stakeholders. And last but certainly not least, check or update and incorporate each of these at every step in the life cycle, especially when making go or no-go decisions on major stages of development or deployment of these systems. This work is primarily focused on the developers of such systems, does not provide all guidance that might be needed by downstream developers building on these systems, does not provide all guidance that may be needed in particular industry sectors or applications. So this is essentially horizontal guidance. It's not vertical guidance for specific industry sectors. It would be appropriate if you're developing an end-use application to also use guidance specific to that sector. The best practices available in this area are relatively nascent. We're incorporating and building on the best that are available now, but we expect that those will continue to evolve substantially. I talked a little bit about open source as a challenge. We've heard a little bit about some of the other standards efforts that are also trying to formulate and promulgate standards guidance for generative AI. This includes the NIST Generative AI Public Working Group and their forthcoming generative AI profile. NIST has indicated that they plan to focus on a few areas: governance, pre-deployment testing, content provenance, and incident disclosure. There are a number of other efforts that I think are quite valuable, and including ones that I did not specifically list on this slide. We're trying for our work to usefully inform those efforts in addition to providing a contribution in its own right. We've heard about AI regulations in Europe and potential regulations here in the United States. One thing that I'll say is that as someone who's been involved, Rohit mentioned that I'm a member of JTC1, SC42, and I'm also involved in the working groups of some other AI standards groups. In my view, both the sort of top-down and bottom-up regulatory approaches, or sort of hard law first versus soft law first approaches, they overlap and interact at standards. The EU AI Act, many of the important implementation details would be developed by standards, European standards organizations, and conversely, in the United States, I think some people have predicted that the NIST RMF might, and the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights might form the part of the basis for regulatory approaches here in the United States. In my view, both the bottom-up and top-down approaches really meet in the middle with interoperable and harmonized standards, and I've been impressed by the degree to which SC42 and NIST and other standards development organizations have really reached out to each other to try to keep each other well informed and to try to develop interoperable and harmonized standards. My colleagues and I have some recommendations for risk management standards-based regulatory approaches for regulating large-scale, highly capable generative AI. And those, so probably many of these will seem obvious to people here in this room, but first is just to ensure that developers of such systems adhere to appropriate standards and guidance, ensure that these systems undergo sufficient pre-release evaluations to identify and mitigate risks of severe harm, and of course, ensure that regulators tasked with enforcing these rules actually have sufficient regulatory authority and resources to do that job. So how can we, I've talked a little bit about some of the challenges of writing and updating standards in this area for AI generally, and specifically for these technologies. How can we try to write standards that are appropriately future-proof, but while still being actionable for industry and regulators and so on? Well, my recommendations include that standards should maintain consistency on key risk management principles, for example, to prevent substantial risks of severe harm, address risks that are already present now and that are likely to increase in the future, for example, of misuse or dual use potential. Be anticipatory where we can, try to think about how technologies might change in 2 years, 5 years. If we have another architectural innovation, what comes after transformers? What's the next generation of deep learning system or other systems that might be used beyond transformers? How can we write standards that are sufficiently detailed to be actionable, but without being overly tied to architectural details, for example, of transformers specifically? How can we write standards that are sufficiently adaptable to these types of changes, or to continually incorporate the latest practices and evidence on risks and mitigations, or pointing to resources that do continually update? One of the things that I think NIST has done well with its development of the NIST ARMF is developing a core set of guidance in the ARMF, but then also having the supplemental guidance in the ARMF playbook, which they've stated they're planning to, or they're aiming to update on a 6-month basis. Every 6 months, they would be updating that. And so I think I think these are in some ways not entirely new challenges for standards development. We've seen rapid developments in other areas as well. But I do think that this is really, my title slide had future-proof ? I don't think that we have all the answers to how to write standards or continually update standards so that they are sufficiently future-proof, given the types of innovations that we may see or continue to see in this area. But I would encourage you and your colleagues doing standards development to continue to ask the questions of how can we write standards and update our standards to be appropriately future-proof? How can we address risks that are already present and also risks that are likely to increase in the future? How can we be appropriately anticipatory and adaptive to future systems? Thank you very much. I look forward to continuing to work with ANSI and SC42 and NIST and others, both now and into the future. Thank you.
Any questions? Maybe I could ask one. Dr. Barrett, how do you see, what is the existential risk of AI going out of hand and doing mass-scale destruction? How do you look at that? Where do you think such a thing could come off?
Great question. Well, oftentimes in my own work, I've focused more on catastrophic risks rather than existential risks per se. In my view, there are many things that we can do now to implement risk mitigations, anticipate risks that could pose, could lead to some sort of catastrophic impact, large-scale impacts. And many of the things that can be done now to address large-scale impacts even things that we would regard as catastrophic, on the level of terrorist attacks or manipulation of elections, large-scale bias, and so on. It doesn't necessarily lead immediately to, extinction of humanity, but I think many of the things that we can do constructively to address catastrophes of many scales of magnitude can also address usefully risks of, hypothetical risks of even larger scale impacts.
Okay. Any other questions? All right.
Everybody wants lunch.
All right, then. Thanks, everybody. This concludes our morning session. We'll meet again at 1 o'clock for our afternoon session.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brandon Abley. I'm the Director of Technology for NINA, the 911 Association. For quick trivia, has anyone in here ever texted 911?
You at Cisco?
Yes. Does anybody know that you can? Yeah, like 1 or 2 hands. Okay, so in most places you can text 911, just public safety or public service announcement. I've introduced myself. I'll allow my co-panelists to introduce themselves also, starting on my left, and then we'll get to Zoom last.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Griffin. I am the Director of Corporate Safety at IBM, responsible for safety across all the business units. I work with a number of teammates within the standards community, as well as the safety, risk management, risk tolerance, and work with our consulting groups on understanding their needs with clients who have safety critical applications.
Good afternoon, everyone. Elham Tabassi. I'm the Associate Director for Emerging Technologies at Information Technology Laboratory at National Institute of Standards and Technology. I also lead the Trustworthy Responsible AI program at NIST, and which will release the AI risk management framework in January, and several other related efforts going on. Glad to be here.
And I'm Jason Matisow, the Corporate Standards Group at Microsoft. I spoke earlier, so hello to everybody again.
Okay. Hi, I'm Marielle Acosta. I'm Corporate Program Manager for Product Safety at IBM, and I am a member of JTC1 SC42 and also TC108.
Okay, thank you. So I believe each of the panelists have prepared some opening remarks. Which one of you would like to start?
Go ahead, Bob.
Yes, I can start. I am very happy to be able to share with you, even if it is just for a few minutes, and if the conversation is a little one-sided because I'm away. Luckily, Bob, who is our leader for IBM's safety, was able to join you in person for the question and answer part of the panel. As you heard from our bio, we work in product safety. In our field, we make sure that the products that are placed in the market have been properly assessed and have adequate guardrails or safeguards that would prevent harm to person and property during the useful life cycle of the product. Of course, with the increase of AI, we are researching the effect that possible implementations for machine learning or foundational models could have in the certification methodologies that we use. We are trying to understand how these new capabilities will be integrated into product offerings, trying to prepare for when these AI tools are used for safety critical applications. It's important to note that for many industries, industrial machinery, road vehicles, just to list a few, there are published standards for functional safety that specify the minimum requirements for high-risk environment. The challenge is to determine how some of these tools used in the industry will need to evolve to accommodate algorithms on AI, machine learning, including generative AI. Off the top of your head, you could think about the risk management system. It will require a process to identify and classify any use of generative AI that when it crosses over into controlling a safety critical function, and some kind of a flag saying, hey, I'm not here just to tell you complete a sentence, but I am going to be driving a safety function. And as you can imagine, due to the complexity of the integration, the development of safeguards for such applications will require cross-functional teams. And you know, we have the expertise in functional safety, but that does not necessarily mean that these experts know about how the foundational models are trained. And the people working on AI, they may not know what are the requirements that they need to meet. In risk management system, again, there are some dependencies on applications and end user. And this has come up before with some of the other speakers. You would not treat AI that is used in the medical field the same way, with the same constraints as you would treat AI that is used to capture statistics in sports. The expected user is also part of the equation. In other domains, we see how requirements vary for products that are used in home offices, where there is the potential of access to children and pets, as opposed to products that are considered highly specialized, located in data centers with controlled access. And similar cases, not exactly that, but similarities may be found for AI applications. And the last point that I wanted to make, but is very, very important, I think, is how tolerable risks are going to be defined for each application. With all these variability, validation tests, verification techniques for the guardrails may need to be customized depending on the application. In summary, and just to make sure that the point is clear, many industries already have methods to ensure that the hardware and software used in critical applications are deemed safe. Now the challenge is to find out how to integrate AI, but we do believe that we can leverage the expertise and best practices in those domains to develop the standards that will regulate safety critical AI.
And just to wrap up on those thoughts, a little bit on standards, regulation, and conformity assessment. There has to be standards development, and it has to be done horizontally and internationally. This piece has to tie together with the work of SC 42. It has to work within the ISO TCs and SCs and the IEC TCs that own many of these safety critical system standards. So it has to play in both worlds. You need open source, you need best practices, you need a lot of those wonderful things that standards do, but you also are going to need a layer that are intended to support regulation. And on the backside, we know we've seen regulation. We know what Europe's doing. We see proposals from around the world. The difference in safety critical systems is that many of the regulations and standards for risk management are already in place. They need to evolve in a way that's consistent with the way other standards and communities are looking at generative AI, looking at AI more broadly. That whole piece has to work together. It's never going to be seamless. I've worked in the standards business for a long time. There's nothing perfect there. I've never met a standard that's finished, but the work will move forward, and it'll come together the right way. And the last piece is on conformity assessment. To me, that is one of the bigger challenges. We know how to do assessment of software. We know how to do assessment of safety critical software, but many of those tools are not prepared for generative AI applications, and that piece of work will become very important on the back end. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead. Sure.
Okay. Again, glad to be here among all these esteemed panelists. For some of you that may not know NIST, I'll start by giving a quick overview of NIST and why we are in this business of trustworthy AI and standards. Of course, standards is our middle name, but we are not standard development organizations such as ISIL. Our job is to help US industry in their participations in development of the standard and provide the right technical contributions. NIST is a federal laboratory with a mission of helping US industrial competitiveness and promoting US innovation. We have a very broad portfolio of research doing many things from building the most accurate atomic clock to modeling the behavior of the wildfire to cybersecurity, privacy, AI. We also have a long-standing tradition of cultivating trust in technology, and we do that by advancing measurement science, participating in development of standards, measurement science and standards that make technology more secure, more reliable, more robust, in other words, more trustworthy. And that's exactly what we are doing in the space of AI. We all know AI has numerous potential positive uses, but they can also cause cascading negative consequences if the proper safeguards are not put in place. There is a need for clear specifications of what to measure and how to measure, and that becomes standards and conformity assessments. By defining common vocabularies, establishing socio-technical characteristics for trustworthy AI, so what we mean by trustworthy, what constitutes trust, and developing methodologies and metrics for verification, validations, and evaluations of AI systems. Standards can provide the rights, guardrails, and safeguards for innovation to happen safely and for AI systems to be developed in a trustworthy manner and be used in a responsible way. All sections of the society can benefit from its potential benefits in a responsible, equitable way. Aware of the global nature of the technology and evolving policy discussions across the border, we were working on scalable, research-based and science-based methods for understanding the risk of AI, understanding trustworthiness of AI, and bringing the community on conversations about what really makes this AI systems trustworthy. Knowing what to measure is really important to be able to actually do the measurement. And directed by congressional mandate, we released the AI risk management framework on January 2023. It's a voluntary framework for managing the risk of AI systems in a flexible, structured, and measurable way. Structured in terms of that the first part of that provides some sort of an interoperable lexicon on what we mean by AI system, what we mean by risk, what we mean by trustworthy AI, and provides that foundations or language to talk about AI risks and AI risk management. Flexible in terms of allow for innovation to happen. As we all know, this is a very fast-paced technology, but also making sure that the different entities with different resources can use and apply AI RMF. And the third attribute of the measurable is something really important for us at NIST, a measurement science agency, because if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. If you really want to improve the trustworthiness of AI systems, we need to know what make AI systems trustworthy, but beyond that, to be able to measure that. AI RMF, and I would just want to underscore what we heard from the first speaker about the importance of risk management be a shared responsibility across all of the AI actors involved in the different stages of AI lifecycle. So AI RMF talks about AI lifecycle, talks about the different actors involved in the different stages of the life cycle, from the design to collect data, to develop, to deploy, and a continuous monitoring. And the second part of the AI RMF provides 72 different recommendations or guidelines categorized in the 4 high-level functions of map, measure, manage, and govern to be able to approach the measurement of AI systems and provide a risk-based framework that's also a rights-based framework. We put the govern as the center of the AI RMF because the governance of the AI systems are very important. It provides guidance on roles and responsibilities, processes and procedures that is needed, or basically the embedding needed for a effective and efficient risk management. The map functions provides guidelines on understanding the context, understanding the risks, understanding the trade-offs involved among the different risks of AI systems, or these different trustworthiness characteristics of the AI systems. This information are being used by the measure functions, where provide recommendations on quantitative or qualitative measurement of the AI systems. Something about the measure functions and something about the current scientific and technical challenge that we have that also gets itself into the development of standards is that evaluations and measurement of AI systems is difficult and challenging. AI systems are not just about data, compute, and algorithm. They are a complex interactions of data, compute, and algorithm with the environment, with the humans that operate it, humans that are using it, humans that are being impacted. So the evaluation of AI system cannot just be evaluations from the computation and system point of view. In our 120 years of existence, we have mastered the art and science of taking systems out of the context of use, bring it in the lab, run data and test them. Those evaluations is going to be insufficient for AI systems. So going back to, again, the first speakers and other speakers about the importance of the context and importance of the use case when it comes to AI measurement and risk management, and approaching it from the socio-technical approach becomes one of the core message of the AI RMF. I'm going to stop here and give it to, I can talk for another hour, but I want to make sure that everybody has time, so I'm going to give it to Jason.
All right, thank you, Ilham. So in approaching this panel, I want to just start with sort of at the highest level. Our organization does see AI fundamentally as a powerful tool to augment work and experience for people and to make them more productive. But AI must serve humanity, and it must be controlled by humanity. And so within that, the last piece at the highest level is to identify that effectively AI equals software and software equals AI in a lot of ways, and that it's important that we remember there's no separation in a lot of ways of AI as a different discipline, that many of the point was just made earlier in the, it's Bob, sorry, we just met, that many of the existing rules need to be applied. We need to think about them in that way. So there are really 3 high-level AI governance goals then to derive from that. The first is public safety, ensuring that AI remains under human control and does no harm. The second, security, that securing the technology itself from hacking, theft, improper use, et cetera, as well as national security implications, and inclusive of that would be export controls. And then the third is trustworthy innovation, and really breaking those 2 words independently. So secure the technology, governance must be focused on the promise and potential of AI, and the trustworthy element of that innovation is the need for transparency and advanced societal benefits as we lay those out. So breaking it down further, the key trust elements that we've been working with colleagues from competitors as well as government recently really is around this idea of first embracing responsible AI frameworks and standards. First and foremost with the NIST AI RMF, that was the place to really begin in that conversation, but then in recognizing the importance of the international standards work that is happening and the interplay and relationship between those. And really engaging in the with the broad constituencies in that process. And this is going to be a real challenge because most people don't understand this point, is that we have to have trust and faith in the governance of those processes. And that's where an organization like ANSI comes in, and the essential requirements and some of these underpinnings that make the system trustworthy in and of itself. Next is really advancing something that comes from the financial services world, but really this idea of expanding to know your customer, but we've expanded that in our conversations to really what we've coined a KY3C conversation, which is know your customer, know your cloud, and know your content, and that being able to expand that is essential for the conversation. Next is a regulatory architecture, inclusive of applications and models. And then finally, collaboration opportunities between not only people who are like-minded, but also between organizations that are competitors with each other. And that in order for us to get over this good governance basis for trustworthy AI, we're going to need to recognize that market competition cannot be used as the excuse to create unsafe systems. So with that, looking down the road, trustworthy AI challenges ahead. I think that there's Alam's point just a moment ago, I think is absolutely essential. This need for fundamental measurement sciences to help with the interpretability, explainability, predictability, et cetera, of those systems, just not there yet on a broad enough basis. Nation-to-nation regulatory coherence is a big challenge that we're going to be faced with. Conformity assessment and trade rules associated with digital services, which I touched earlier today, but I think there is a big hill still to climb there. And then finally, in this area of frontier models, which is a much smaller subset of actors, but fundamental acceleration of research and standardization and training to help organizations think about how to do that work responsibly. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And to kind of get into like a much more specific case study, my panelists had mentioned public safety from time to time, and I represent the 911 and first response community on this panel. And one of the things that's a big issue in 911 right now is that there are staffing shortages, just insane shortages. So your dispatcher that you call when you need help might very well have been working 16 hours a day for weeks on end, because that's just the reality. You need to staff the 911 center, and you need to staff it 24/7, and you need to answer every single call. It's non-negotiable, right? Do any of my panelists object? Right. Obviously. So one of the things that's come up with AI and public safety in 911 is the potential for AI to help mitigate the staffing shortages. There are some things that make me very uncomfortable about that, but there are also some things of great promise. You can think, for example, an incident record could be automatically populated based on what was said in the call. A human dispatcher would have to review that before they actually dispatched somebody with that record, but that could save some time. At the same time, you have a non-human that is generating this data. That makes me a little bit uncomfortable. For one, from a liability perspective, if we think, an analogy I often make is to self-driving cars. Totally comfortable blaming somebody for crashing a car. I'm not really comfortable blaming software for crashing a car, even if the road miles driven, whatever metric, even if it is like factually safer on average. We're really uncomfortable with the idea that the machine made a mistake. If we go a bit further, we can look at maybe the potential for a very convincing human-like bot to screen 911 calls. That would burden the staff load significantly. You may not be aware of this, but the vast majority of 911 calls are a complete waste of time. This probably doesn't surprise you, but you have people that are mentally ill or live alone. It's an interesting phenomenon, but every answering point you go into, they can tell you the names of their frequent customers, just, or frequent callers. They know the people in their community that call 911 every day, several times a day. They have to, usually at a minimum, do a welfare check, dispatch police, and it's a waste of time. Alarms go off all the time, and almost always when an alarm goes off, it's a waste of time, but you need to dispatch somebody to check out the situation. So there are proposals that maybe AI could screen some of these calls, which from a staffing perspective sounds great, but what if the AI screws up in handling the incident? Because it's not perfect. Even if it was more perfect than a human telecommunicator, we are really not comfortable with that. Does anyone want to dial 911 and talk to a bot? Right? It makes sense from a customer service perspective in other industries, but it is absolutely absurd to think that somebody having a critical emergency would be screened by a bot. Even if the call time were reduced. We are just not comfortable with that. So that's we're talking about some of this stuff in public safety, and this is getting much more specific. As a standards development organization, I have to say that NINA is actually a bit behind because we have not done any standards development in this area in a meaningful way. We've set up a futurists committee in our volunteer group that's working on reports and such, but I think the products and solutions that will make their way into dispatch centers are far ahead of the standards development at this time. So with that, I'd segue into a question for my co-panelists representing different sectors of the industry. Is it already too late for standards development organizations to get their arms around AI?
I'll brave with that. So the recent release of the powerful large language models are all pointing out to the actuality that this technology is moving really fast, faster than what we had seen with other parts of technology, faster than you can argue evaluation standards, policy, governance, accountability measures and approaches can keep up with that. That in no way means that it's too late or anything, because again, going back that we all believe that it has enormous potential for improving our lives, and as Jason said, augmenting human and human AI teaming to do things better. Do we have a lot of work ahead of ourselves to do it? Yes. Should we say it's too late? I don't think so. Two other points I want to point out. For some of us working in technology and information technology, software, computer science, we know that zero error does not exist. But we use technology every day and technology gets better. The same way, zero error doesn't exist. So the effort should not be on completely eliminating risks. It would be great if we get there, but we just have to understand that and improve on top of that. You use the word reliability. Are these systems reliable? It goes back to the point that I was trying to make about we need to know what to measure. So reliability is one of the characteristics of the trustworthiness, as maybe AI-RMF mentioned. I should also say that AI-RMF was developed in an open, transparent, collaborative process with input from a very wide range of the community. So really it's a work of the community and not just NIST. So while the conversations about what make AI systems trustworthy was happening and was very active and hot, particularly in different circles, academics and others, AI-RMF talks about 7 characteristics: valid and reliable, safe, secure and resilient, privacy enhanced, explainable and interpretable, fair with harmful bias managed, accountable and transparent. So by doing that, at least at the first step, you know what are the things that you need to measure. So you talked about reliability, but beyond reliability, there are other things that you want to measure to make sure that your system is functioning functioning in a trustworthy manner. Do we have all the tools and methods and metrics to measure all of these things and understand the trade-offs involved among all of them? Not at this moment, but is it too late to do anything? I think not. And we can go back and look at the history about other technology, other industries that has been developed, and I'm pretty sure they dealt with the challenge of understanding and making sure that it works for the people, planet, and societies, and that's what we're doing right now.
Just to add to that a little bit, the development of standards and regulation in high-risk spaces, it's an evolutionary process. You have brilliant ideas, you have best practices, parts get codified, regulators take an interest, but you see the development of standards and regulation and best practices kind of work together to a point where you really need the safeguards, either mandated by a regulation if it's safety critical, or placed on the market in a way that your liability discussion doesn't interfere with the product that's being placed on there. It's very much an evolution, particularly with a new technology. We're seeing it in quantum, we're seeing it in just about any new application, autonomous vehicles. The standards and the regulatory interest and the marketing of brilliant ideas kind of comes along together.
I saw your head shaking, sir.
I'm in agreement. I don't think I have more to add on this particular point. I think these guys have done a wonderful job.
Okay, with respect to regulations, I'm curious, there's kind of an interesting balance between, especially in telecom where I work, between regulation and standards development. And quite frequently, for example, in 911, issues in front of the FCC or CRTC are deferred to us because they would prefer not to actually have to regulate it. And we see this in other sectors, but that's just the one I'm most familiar with. With respect to generative AI, where do you think the appropriate balance lies between standards development organizations and then just straight up regulations?
So I'm happy to jump in on this one. And I think that what we're looking at is a spectrum issue. So I mentioned earlier this morning when I spoke, the idea that a regulation creates a space in which good actors are given the rules of the road as to what good action looks like, and it creates the space for authorities to go after people who are acting not within the box. That's a very simple view of it. But what are the mechanisms that we use within that box? There's quite a range, and you can look at the role of something like a code of conduct, right? So when people were unhappy with how tuna fish was being produced, the industry created the tuna dolphin safe logo on the side of the cans that we all now can see in the grocery store. It's a code of conduct. There was no regulation that required it, but an industry that said, we have a problem, we have a consumer, both a perceived and real problem, and we need to do something about it. You can look at something like fair trade in chocolate or anything else that you might see, those similar things happen. There are steps that we take as a society that are purely voluntary in nature, and the standard acts in that case as soft law. And I think that soft law role is something that we can lean into and make use of. But the soft law role runs to a limit. And at that point, we do need the hard regulation to be there as well, because you do want authorities to have room to act against people who are taking aberrant or acting in an aberrant way. So I get very worried when I see an over-reliance on standards in conversations with regulatory authorities where there is a point that they should take action as regulators. But I also get worried that they don't understand the value and power of the voluntary mechanisms that have led to so much expansion and capability in society across so many different models. And so I don't think there is an easy answer to this, but there is a sweet spot that we can shoot for, and one that I think is possible to achieve.
If I can add to that, I just want to again emphasize the role of the standards beyond the soft law that Jason said in support enforcing any type of law, regulations, or policy. Because policies and regulations are going to stay at some sort of abstract level. For example, they say that AI must be safe, but they don't go and define what safety is. They don't go and say how to measure for safety and assure for safety, and that's where the standards come in place, where they bring the definitions and interoperable methodologies for measurement. And I also want to say something about the role of the voluntary. In the AI-RMF, we talk about this, that what the end goal is. We were worried about AI-RMF, and the question that we were getting in development of the AI-RMF, that can you give us a checklist? And we didn't want this to be reduced to a checklist, because we want the risk management to be deliberate, purposeful, and some thought put into this for the particular context. The risks can be different. I think the different risk appetite was also mentioned. So this type of voluntary approaches and trying to get the people that are using this, for example, AIRM of the standards for risk management, to do again a purposeful, deliberate, and make understanding of risk and measurement of risk and managing the different risks as part of the earliest discussions of the systems from the design stage to development, rather than being a checklist or being a bolt-on that put in at the end. So there are all these good benefits about all of this. And I have to this, particularly for this week of the award standard, I've been going to ISO standard meeting, being editor of international standards. Michaela is sitting here for a long time, more than a decade. It really warms my heart that standards are now getting all this love and becoming as part of the discussions for all the important topics, particularly AI technologies.
Only to speak to the voluntary nature of what we do with ANSI standards or ISO standards or IEC standards. From a development perspective, it's important that we develop voluntary standards. Now, you can develop a voluntary standard that supports a particular regulation or an essential requirement or a marketing need, but that infrastructure is important because it becomes the foundational aspect for getting things done internationally. When you start working with national requirements and working with a regulator directly on defining specific requirements, that's handcuffs to an application that really has a global market. So the concept of voluntary standardization is important here. And let it fill in and fit what the regulator might need, if there is a regulator involved, or what the market might need, what a customer might need. It's just a part of the system that we all try to design safe, compliant, competent, and products that do the best we can.
So the term risk had come up a couple of times in the remarks. Just kind of wondering which factors contribute to different levels of risk tolerance for AI across different sectors. And I can speak for mine. The risk tolerance is just about zero. It's literally a matter of life and death, right? So the public safety community has always been very hesitant about adopting new technologies. I mean, first responders still use radios, for example. Earlier in my career, I'd engineered and built a lot of radio systems, and the technology seemed ancient to me even then, because it was. But it's a proven technology, and we don't yet have a perfect broadband-based solution for push-to-talk communications for all sorts of reasons. But that's just one example. In handling a 911 call, the idea of using a computer to aid in dispatch became normal much later than you would expect. The idea of using maps, software maps for dispatch, again, came far later than you would probably would have expected, because the risk tolerance is so low. Whenever any new technology is introduced into the emergency call and handling of the incidents, you don't want to rely on something cutting edge that isn't extremely proven, for better or worse. So I can say with AI tools in public safety, Aside from some forward thinkers, generally the community is very, very hesitant. I go back to that idea of having your 911 call quarantined by, even if it's the most convincing, realistic chatbot in the world, it's still a chatbot. And that would make any of you uncomfortable, I think. But with that, I mean, with the sectors that you're familiar with and working on, what factors do you think contribute to the different levels of risk tolerance?
I do think it's sector specific. Now, there's in the risk management approach, you define your risk tolerance based on the potential for harm, the frequency of injury, the types of harms, the types of injury, and you work from there to mitigate any risks that a potential source of harm has, back to some residual risk that's below the tolerable risk. And you're trying to meet that line. If you look at a generative AI application in autonomous vehicles and compare that with a very similar application in medical diagnosis, both are safety critical applications, but the requirement, the risk tolerance, the thresholds that they're working with in the environments, the types of injuries they're working with are very different. So it's tough to do at a holistic level. And that's the reason if you look out in the safety critical environment, you see a risk management standard for nuclear plants, a risk management standard for industrial robots, a risk management standard for medical devices. They're all based on the same fundamental risk management approach, but they're all very different. And a lot of it has to do with the methodology, but it all does come back to what is your risk tolerance?
I guess I would take the conversation a little bit further to see where you started in your, as you frame this question. What we want are risk-based systems for this exact reason, right? The danger in some of the regulatory approaches on AI is when people get into this idea that you would establish a prescriptive model for the regulatory approach. Say, here are the risks that you must address, and here are the things that you must do. Because the problem is, as you look across the entirety of all sectors of use of technology, there is no way to get a prescriptive list that is inclusive of that, and it's certainly impossible to deal with the change of those technologies over time. So the whole reason for the conversation about a risk-based approach is that each entity must declare its risks within its context, and then address those, and what things like a risk management framework or a good standard underneath it will do. And by the way, just as a point, the risk management framework is not a standard, right? It will then work with standards, and it is a risk model, a risk framework that you can apply with standards, but much like you had, the cybersecurity framework, it's different than the 853 controls for creating secure cloud solutions. It's the same concept. But where we're going with this, though, is that you want an environment which allows you to assert your risks. And here's the underside of it, which is very interesting from a technology provider perspective, is that introducing this idea of transparency documentation as opposed to product documentation or marketing materials, right? So that you have the ability for, if Alam is going to build a solution on something that I create, then Alam not only needs to understand what my product is capable of, she needs to understand where it's going to break. How does it suck is a different conversation than how is it great. And that's one of the challenges that we have in this new world of thinking about the risks of AI systems, is that we're going to need to make sure that people have clarity on the underlying factors being declarative of what their limits are, so that when I build a solution on top of it that seeks to achieve these things, I understand where those potential fail points are. But it has to all stick together in a risk-based discussion rather than a prescriptive limits-based discussion.
And if I can agree, in agreement at that, basically there is no one size fits all. In AI-RMF, there is a section that talks about the risk tolerance and talk about that, when AI-RMF talks about the different, provides a taxonomy of risk, does not provide a prescription or a opinion about how safe is safe, how private is private. Example is that using our face recognition for unlocking our phone versus face recognition for law enforcement, completely different type of risk and completely different approaches and tolerances to the risk. Also in agreement with what you said about making sure that we have a sort of and Will mentioned in the previous panel, a horizontal, a sort of interoperable lexicon, so we can talk about risk and risk management in different contexts, in different use cases, but we need to have tailored set of specifications for the particular context, for the particular use case. So AI-RMF by design is technology and use case agnostic, and then envision development of the profile or vertical that's going to give that specificity to the different use cases. So this hybrid of the horizontal and vertical approach for risk management. And of course, yes, we need a lot more standards on advancing, in particular, measurement and metrics and methodology to operationalize risk management approaches.
So I guess we're getting close to time. I'd like to leave some opportunities for any questions from the audience. I don't see any on Q&A in Zoom, but.
We got one in the back.
Yeah.
Reinaldo Figueiredo with the ANSI National Accreditation Board, ANAB. And I'm also ISO Casco Chair. That is the ISO committee that developed horizontal conformity assessment standards. I heard a lot of these words today about conformity assessment on AI and other areas that we're talking about here today. In Casco, we have horizontal standards that cover conformity assessment. I like to also to request to all of you in the panel to provide some suggestions on how to tackle this problem, because I'm sure you do, and you know companies that they do like first-party conformity assessment on those activities that we're talking about here, and this can be used in the third party in the future. I like to get your insights on this. Thank you.
So I'm happy to jump into the breach on this one, and I'm sure I'm going to get it at least partially wrong, so please forgive me. But I guess part of the recommendation that I would have here is to think about the concepts of a joint certification approach, where you have some of the traditional practices around products are valid and important relative to these AI systems, but also some of the portions of services conformity assessment. And the truth is today we don't have a blend of those, and you certainly don't have the idea of how you're really thinking about what it is that the audit community needs to understand and really be capable of. I briefly mentioned this before, but I was at this idea of thinking about a refrigerator, but I was at the WTO speaking to the Technical Barriers to Trade committee, and really tried to just lay out this difference of, if you have a refrigerator with a screen on it and it's loaded with sensors, and that screen is serving up applications from 9 different vendors, the certification of the conformity assessment for that refrigerator, a CE mark in Europe or the UL mark here or wherever else it is all over the world, is really an ex ante process in production for that refrigerator. But that application that is now looking at my consumption of food and might diagnose that I have a health problem based on my consumption, or might be just trying to serve up more convenient shopping lists, what you're getting at is this idea of, what does it mean to think about conformity assessment and safety of the applications that are on there, when those applications are provided from different vendors that are built on the backs of different types of cloud services that might be used to service it, and that are updated every Tuesday with new features and capabilities. So the ex ante process is literally not even worth the paper it's on, because by the time you're 3 iterations of software update down the road, that which was certified is completely not even in use on the system anymore. So there needs to be an improvement in our conformity assessment architecture for digital services that are providing AI functionality. And we need to think about that in a way that right now, I don't think that the underlying systems are there. And certainly if you look at, for example, the European Artificial Intelligence Act, they are relying very heavily on the CE mark architecture Regulation 768 for their conformity assessment architecture. And the truth is, I have told this to the commission directly, so I'm not speaking out of school when I say this. I don't think it's going to do the job that they want it to do. I fully embrace the idea of what the AI Act is trying to accomplish, but I don't think that the conformity mechanism that they have declared is the mechanism that's going to get you to where they're hoping to establish, which is a presumption of conformity by actors in the market. And so I think that those systems need to be updated. So I hope that's helpful, but I think that we have some work to do. Alam made the point just a minute ago. We're doing a lot of great stuff, and there is so much more interesting stuff ahead of us, and I think we can be optimistic about it, that we can articulate what these problems are, but they're not done yet, and we're not there. We have a lot to do.
And if I can look at it from, again, evaluations and measurement rather than just conformity assessment, with a lot of products, you do the testing once and you put it out, and the test is valid, but not with AI systems. They're important for continual monitoring and evaluations of the systems, and the changes that may or may not have happened to the systems, but with updates and all that, the behavior can change. Data drift can happen, model drift can happen. You mentioned the residual risk. The residual risks accumulates, and then what happens to the accumulations of those residual risks? So the importance of the continual monitoring of the systems.
And I would add, as someone who is a product of third-party marks all over the place, product safety, electromagnetic compatibility, telecom approvals, I can appreciate the fact that conformity assessment against a regulation or against the standard is kind of the last step in the process, and that's unfortunate. You can write standards that would be beneficial to a conformity assessment system or aligned with a conformity assessment system if you understand there may be a need for a third-party perspective. Is first party adequate? Is it a management system we're certifying, or a product, or a service, or a solution? There's a lot of elements in that, and I know Casco does a wonderful job at trying to get ahead of these things. It's difficult to stay ahead of the standards community, which doesn't sound right sometimes when you talk about the length of time it takes to develop a standard. But I know the IEC is working on it as well. There's a new Conformity Assessment Board task force that's looking at AI conformity assessment, and they should be coming together this fall and working on some sort of product before the end of next year. But it's a big deal. You've got to be able to provide the evidence that you meet either a customer expectation, a client expectation, or a regulator's expectation. And there is a diversity of ways to do it. It's figuring out what the right level of confidence you need in the evidence to be able to make the system work.
Okay, so I believe that puts us at about time, right? So I want to thank my panelists for joining, and I do have a reminder for all of you. Anyone watch that HBO series Jinx? So make sure to turn in your microphones before going to the restroom and mumbling about the fact that you murdered those people. Just a reminder. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.